thought it would be a simple wager, to marry a stranger and prove he didn't care about beauty. But when the bride walks in and he realizes she is blind, everything changes. What happens when a king who claimed not to care about appearances meets someone who can't see his? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The great hall of Thornwick Castle blazed with torchlight as King Harold Thornwood sat upon his throne, his massive frame draped in a heavy cloak of dark wool lined with wolf fur. The firelight danced across his strong features, illuminating a face that had seen 30 winters, with a square jaw shadowed by dark stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. His broad shoulders strained against the leather jerkin he wore beneath the cloak, and his powerful hands gripped the carved arms of his throne as he surveyed the assembled nobility before him with barely concealed irritation. The evening had begun as a celebration to mark the 5th anniversary of his coronation, but the mood had soured considerably over the past hour. Lord Victor Ashworth, a pompous nobleman from the Southern Territories, had been needling the king with thinly veiled criticisms about his unmarried state, suggesting that a kingdom without an heir was a kingdom in peril. "Your Majesty surely understands the precarious position in which you place the realm," Lord Ashworth continued, his nasal voice grating on Harold's nerves. The man stood near the fire, warming his hands, his crimson tunic embroidered with gold thread catching the light. "A king of your age should have produced heirs by now. The council grows restless." Harold's closest friend and advisor, Sir Marcus Brennan, stood to the right of the throne, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Marcus was lean and quick, with sharp features and auburn hair that fell to his shoulders. He wore a simple tunic of deep green wool with leather bracers on his forearms, and his expression showed clear distaste for Ashworth's boldness. "Perhaps Lord Ashworth forgets himself," Marcus said coolly. "The king's personal affairs are not subject to the council's approval." Ashworth turned, his jowls quivering with indignation. "The succession is everyone's affair, Sir Marcus. Or would you see the kingdom plunged into chaos when our good king eventually falls in battle or succumbs to illness?" Harold felt his jaw tighten. He had avoided marriage for years, unwilling to be trapped in a loveless political union like so many of his fellow monarchs. He had watched his own father grow cold and distant in such a marriage, and he had sworn to himself that he would choose differently, or not at all. "I will marry when I find a woman worthy of being queen," Harold said, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs that had begun to spread through the hall. "Not before." "And how many more years shall we wait, Your Majesty?" challenged Lady Beatrice Wainwright, a sharp-tongued noblewoman known for her cutting remarks. She wore a gown of deep purple with silver threading, her graying hair pulled back severely from her angular face. "You have rejected every suitable candidate presented to you. One might think you incapable of making such a decision." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Harold rose from his throne, his impressive height making even the tall guards flanking him seem small. At 6 feet and 4 inches, with muscles hardened by years of training and battle, he cut an imposing figure. His anger simmered just below the surface, but he kept his voice level. "Incapable?" he repeated, taking a step down from the dais. "You question my capability, Lady Beatrice?" The noblewoman had the grace to look momentarily uncertain, but Lord Ashworth, emboldened by wine and arrogance, laughed. "Perhaps her ladyship merely suggests that Your Majesty is too particular. After all, you seek perfection in an imperfect world." "I seek authenticity," Harold corrected him. "I seek a woman whose character matches her station, not merely a pretty face with an impressive dowry." "Then perhaps Your Majesty would accept a wager," Ashworth said, his eyes glittering with malice. "Since you claim to value character over appearance, would you be willing to prove it?" Marcus stepped forward, his hand tightening on his sword. "Lord Ashworth, you overstep." But Harold raised a hand, stopping his friend. Something in Ashworth's tone had piqued his interest, though he sensed a trap being laid. "What manner of wager?" Ashworth's thin lips curved into a smile. "A simple one, Your Majesty. You claim to value inner worth over outward beauty. I propose that you agree to marry a woman of my choosing, sight unseen. If you find her character worthy after the wedding, then I will cede my southern lands to the crown and never again question your judgment. But if you find yourself unable to honor such a marriage, you will admit before the court that appearance does matter, and you will allow the council to arrange a proper political marriage." The hall erupted in whispers. Harold felt the blood rushing in his ears. It was a reckless proposition, clearly designed to humiliate him, yet his pride bristled at the implicit challenge to his integrity. He had always maintained that he valued substance over superficiality, that he would know a worthy queen by her heart and mind rather than her face. "This is madness," Marcus hissed, moving close to Harold's side. "Don't let this fool bait you into such foolishness." But Harold's competitive nature, the same fierce drive that had won him countless tournaments and battles, had been awakened. He looked at Ashworth with narrowed eyes. "You would choose the woman?" "I would," Ashworth confirmed. "And I swear before this assembly that she is of noble birth, of appropriate age, and has committed no crimes. Beyond that you would know nothing until after the ceremony. And if I find her character worthy, you will surrender your lands?" "Every acre," Ashworth agreed. "But when you fail, you will bend to the council's will." Harold's mind raced. The Ashworth lands were extensive and strategically valuable, bordering the coast and controlling several important trade routes. To acquire them without warfare would strengthen the kingdom considerably. But more than that, his pride demanded that he prove his principles were more than empty words. "Your Majesty, please," Marcus urged quietly. "Think on this. Do not make decisions in anger." Harold looked at his friend, seeing the genuine concern there. Marcus had served him faithfully since they were boys training together in the castle yards. He trusted Marcus's judgment above all others. Yet something in him rebelled against the caution. Perhaps it was the wine he had consumed, or perhaps it was years of pent-up frustration at the constant pressure to marry, but he felt a reckless determination settling over him. "I accept your wager, Lord Ashworth," Harold declared, his voice ringing through the hall. "Bring me this woman of noble birth and appropriate age. I will marry her sight unseen, and when I find her worthy, your lands will become part of the crown's holdings." The hall exploded with noise, nobles talking over each other in excitement and shock. Lady Beatrice looked scandalized, while other lords appeared delighted at the prospect of such entertainment. Ashworth's smile widened, and Harold felt a flicker of unease. The man looked far too pleased with himself. "Excellent, Your Majesty," Ashworth said, bowing deeply. "I shall make the arrangements immediately. Shall we say the ceremony takes place in 1 week's time?" "1 week," Harold agreed, returning to his throne with firm steps, though his heart had begun to pound with the realization of what he had just committed to. "But mark my words, Ashworth. When I prove you wrong, I will expect the transfer of your lands to be swift and complete." "Of course, Your Majesty," Ashworth said smoothly. "I am a man of my word." As the assembly gradually dispersed, still buzzing with gossip and speculation, Marcus remained at Harold's side. When the last of the nobles had filed out and only the guards remained at their posts, Marcus finally spoke. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen you do," he said quietly. "Possibly both." Harold leaned back in his throne, suddenly feeling the weight of his impulsive decision. "He goaded me into it deliberately." "Of course he did," Marcus agreed. "The question is why? What does he gain from this?" "If I refuse to honor the marriage, he gains power over me," Harold reasoned. "The council would force me into a political match of their choosing, likely with Ashworth's own niece or some other alliance that benefits him. And if you do honor the marriage?" Harold was silent for a moment, staring into the dying fire. "Then I gain his lands and prove that my word means something. Or you trap yourself in a miserable marriage to spite a man you dislike," Marcus countered. "Harold, whoever this woman is, Ashworth chose her specifically to make this difficult for you. He wouldn't risk his lands otherwise." The king nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his friend's words. "What do you think he's planning?" Marcus paced before the throne, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He could choose someone completely unsuitable, someone old or cruel or dim-witted, someone so objectionable that even you couldn't maintain the pretense of finding her worthy. "But she must be of noble birth and appropriate age," Harold reminded him. He swore to it before witnesses. "That still leaves considerable room for unpleasant surprises," Marcus said grimly. "Harold, it's not too late. Claim you were drunk, that the wager was made in jest. No one would blame you." Harold considered it, feeling the temptation of the easy escape. But then he thought of how he would look to his people, to his nobles, to himself. A king who couldn't keep his word, who backed down from a challenge the moment he sobered up. His father had been many things, but never a coward, never a man who broke his promises. "No," he said finally. "I made the wager publicly. I will see it through." Marcus sighed but nodded, recognizing the stubborn set of his friend's jaw. Then we prepare for a wedding in 1 week's time, though I wish I knew what manner of bride Ashworth is selecting. As do I, Harold admitted, rising from the throne. His cloak settled around his shoulders as he moved toward the private chambers behind the dais. But we'll face whatever comes, we always have. The two men walked through the torch-lit corridors of Thornwick Castle, their footsteps accompanied by the distant sound of the winter wind howling around the stone walls. The castle had stood for 300 years, weathering wars and rebellions and the changing of dynasties. Harold's ancestors looked down from portraits hung along the walls, their painted eyes seeming to judge him for his rash decision. When they reached Harold's private chambers, Marcus paused at the door. "I'll make discreet inquiries," he offered. "Perhaps we can learn who Ashworth intends to choose." "Do so," Harold agreed, "but quietly. I won't have it said I tried to circumvent the terms of the wager." After Marcus departed, Harold entered his chambers and moved to the window that overlooked the castle grounds. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the training yards and the gardens with white. In the distance, he could see the lights of the town that sprawled around the castle walls, the homes of his subjects who depended on him to rule wisely and well. He thought of his father, dead these past 5 years, and wondered what the old king would make of this situation. Probably he would have laughed that booming laugh of his and called Harold a fool, but an honest fool at least. His mother, gone even longer, would have worried and fretted, but she had always supported his choices in the end. The truth was, Harold had avoided marriage not just because he feared a loveless match, but because he had never felt that spark of connection with any of the women presented to him. They had been beautiful, accomplished, politically advantageous, but none had stirred anything in his heart beyond polite appreciation. He had begun to wonder if he was capable of that deeper feeling at all, or if years of war and responsibility had hardened something essential within him. Now he had committed himself to marrying a complete stranger, someone Ashworth had specifically chosen to challenge him. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to avoid a marriage of convenience, he had arranged the most inconvenient marriage imaginable. Sleep eluded him that night as he lay in his great bed, staring at the canopy above. Somewhere in the kingdom, a woman he had never met was about to have her life completely altered by his reckless wager. He hoped, for both their sakes, that she was at least prepared for what was coming. The week that followed passed in a blur of preparations. The castle staff worked frantically to ready the great hall for a royal wedding, hanging banners and bringing in fresh rushes for the floor. Harold attended to his usual duties with distracted efficiency, his mind often wandering to speculation about his unknown bride. Marcus reported back after 3 days with troubling news. "I've made inquiries throughout the kingdom," he said, meeting with Harold in the king's private study. "No one seems to know which Lady Ashworth has chosen. He's been unusually secretive about the whole affair." Harold looked up from the documents he had been reviewing. Plans for new fortifications along the northern border. "That doesn't bode well." "No," Marcus agreed, settling into a chair across from the king's desk. "I did learn something interesting, though. Ashworth has been seen traveling to the Western Territories near the border of Wales. He returned yesterday with a covered carriage." "So she's here then," Harold said, feeling his stomach tighten. "In the castle?" "Somewhere on the grounds, yes. Ashworth has her housed in the old North Tower, the one we usually reserve for foreign dignitaries. He's posted guards and refuses to let anyone see her before the ceremony." Harold pushed back from his desk, rising to pace the room. The study was one of his favorite places in the castle, lined with books and maps, warmed by a generous fire. He had spent countless hours here with his tutors as a boy, learning the history and geography that would serve him as king. "This secrecy suggests he's hiding something about her," Harold mused. "Some flaw he thinks will make me reject her." "Undoubtedly," Marcus said. "The question is what? If she were hideously ugly, would that matter to you?" Harold considered the question honestly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I like to think it wouldn't, that I would judge her on her character as I claimed. But I'm human, Marcus. I have eyes. And pride," Marcus added. "Ashworth is counting on that. He wants you to be so repulsed or disappointed that you publicly refuse to honor the marriage, proving his point about the importance of appearance. Then I must not give him that satisfaction," Harold said firmly. "Whatever this woman looks like, whatever flaws she may have, I will treat her with respect and courtesy. I will find something worthy in her, because every person has worth. Marcus smiled slightly. That's the man I know, though I'll admit I'm curious to see how this plays out. The day of the wedding dawned cold and clear, with frost coating every surface like diamonds. Harold dressed with unusual care, donning a tunic of deep blue wool embroidered with silver thread in the pattern of his house sigil, a fierce hawk with wings spread. Over this he wore a cloak of black fur, clasped at the shoulder with a heavy silver brooch. His dark hair was freshly trimmed, and he had shaved carefully, wanting to make a good impression despite his nervousness. As he made his way to the castle's private chapel where the ceremony would take place, he was accompanied by Marcus and a small procession of his most trusted advisors. The chapel was intimate compared to the great hall, with room for perhaps 50 people at most. Ashworth had agreed that the ceremony itself would be private, with only essential witnesses present. The public celebration would come later, assuming Harold went through with the marriage. The chapel smelled of incense and candles, their light flickering across the ancient stone walls. At the altar stood Father Benedict, an elderly priest who had served the castle for 40 years. His weathered face showed concern as Harold approached, but he said nothing, merely nodding in greeting. Harold took his place at the altar, his heart hammering in his chest. Marcus stood beside him, close enough to offer support without seeming to hover. The other witnesses arranged themselves on the benches, their whispers echoing in the sacred space. Then the chapel doors opened, and Lord Ashworth entered. Lord Ashworth wore an expression of barely concealed triumph as he entered the chapel, his crimson robes sweeping behind him. He bowed to Harold with exaggerated courtesy before turning to gesture toward the doorway. Harold's breath caught in his throat as he waited to see the woman who would become his queen. She entered slowly, guided by a maidservant Harold didn't recognize. The first thing he noticed was her beauty, which struck him with unexpected force. She had delicate features framed by long golden hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, partially covered by a veil of fine white lace. Her gown was simple but elegant, made of cream-colored wool with embroidered details along the fitted bodice and flowing sleeves. The dress emphasized her slender figure, and even from a distance, Harold could see the graceful way she moved. But there was something strange about her movements. She held the maidservant's arm with a grip that seemed more necessary than ceremonial, and her steps were cautious, almost hesitant. As she drew closer, Harold saw that her eyes, a striking shade of blue-green like the sea on a clear day, didn't quite focus on anything. They seemed to look through him rather than at him, beautiful but somehow distant. Then, understanding crashed over him like a wave of cold water. She was blind. Harold heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath beside him and knew his friend had realized the same thing. This was Ashworth's play. He had chosen a blind woman, someone whose disability would supposedly make her unsuitable as queen, someone Harold would be forced to either reject publicly or accept, despite the perceived flaw, proving Ashworth's point either way. The woman reached the altar, and the maidservant gently released her arm before stepping back. For a moment, the bride stood alone, her hands clasped before her, her face turned generally toward where Harold stood but not quite meeting his eyes. He could see her chest rising and falling with nervous breaths, and he noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. Father Benedict cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "Your Majesty, may I present Lady Adriana Whitmore of the Western Territories." Adriana. Harold tested the name silently, watching her face. She was younger than him, perhaps 23 or 24 years old, with skin like porcelain and lips that looked soft despite being pressed together in obvious tension. There was an ethereal quality to her beauty, enhanced rather than diminished by the unfocused quality of her gaze. "Lady Adriana," Harold said, his deep voice gentler than usual. "I am King Harold." Her lips parted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was melodious and clear, though quiet with nervousness. "Your Majesty, I am honored to meet you." She didn't say she was honored to see him, Harold noticed. The deliberate word choice told him she was aware of her condition and how it might be perceived. He glanced at Ashworth, who stood to the side wearing an expression of smug satisfaction, clearly waiting for Harold to balk at the situation. Instead, Harold took a step closer to Adriana. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand even though he knew she couldn't see the gesture. She hesitated, confused by the question. The maidservant whispered something, and Adriana slowly raised her hand. Harold took it carefully in his own, struck by how small and delicate it felt against his larger, calloused palm. He could feel the trembling in her fingers, and wondered if it was fear or simply the cold of the chapel. "I know this is an unusual situation," he said quietly, for her ears primarily, though others could hear. "I hope you will not judge me too harshly for the circumstances that brought us here." Adriana's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickering across her features. "I am not in a position to judge anyone, Your Majesty." "Nevertheless," Harold continued, still holding her hand, "I want you to know that you need not be afraid. Whatever happens after today, I will treat you with respect and kindness." He saw her swallow hard, her composure threatening to crack. "You are generous, Your Majesty. More generous than I expected." Ashworth stepped forward, his impatience evident. "Shall we proceed with the ceremony, Your Majesty? Or do you wish to discuss the terms of our wager first?" Harold felt anger flash through him at the man's callousness, treating this woman as nothing more than a pawn in his political game. He released Adriana's hand carefully and turned to face Ashworth directly. "The only thing I wish to discuss, Lord Ashworth, is your complete lack of honor in this matter," Harold said coldly. "You speak of wagers and terms while standing in a sacred space, in the presence of a lady who deserves better than to be used as an instrument of manipulation." Ashworth's smile faltered slightly. "I merely followed the conditions we agreed upon, Your Majesty. Lady Adriana is of noble birth and appropriate age. She has committed no crimes. Everything was according to our bargain." "You deliberately chose someone you thought I would reject," Harold countered. "Someone whose condition you believed would make her unsuitable as queen in my eyes." "And if that's true," Ashworth challenged, "if I chose someone with a flaw you find unacceptable, doesn't that prove my original point? That appearance and physical perfection do matter, despite your claims otherwise?" Harold could feel everyone's eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond. He glanced at Adriana, who stood very still, her face pale but composed. She had to know she was being discussed, evaluated, judged. The humiliation of it made his anger burn hotter. "Lady Adriana," he said, turning back to her and speaking clearly so all could hear, "I apologize that you have been drawn into this situation. You deserve to know the full truth of how we came to be here." Quickly but thoroughly, he explained the wager he had made with Ashworth, leaving nothing out, including his own prideful foolishness in accepting such a challenge. As he spoke, he watched Adriana's face, seeing various emotions pass across it: understanding, embarrassment, resignation, and finally something that might have been anger, though she kept it tightly controlled. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Adriana spoke, her voice stronger than before. "So I am to be the proof of your character, Your Majesty? Or the evidence of your hypocrisy?" The bluntness of her question surprised him. "I would prefer neither," he answered honestly. "I would prefer you to simply be yourself, and we will see what comes of that." "And if what comes of it is that you find me wanting?" she asked. "What then? Do I return to my family in disgrace? The woman even a king who claims not to value appearance found too flawed to accept?" Harold heard the pain beneath her words, and understood that this situation was far more cruel to her than to him. He would face embarrassment if he backed out, but she would face genuine suffering, marked forever as the rejected bride. "That will not happen," he said firmly. "I gave my word that I would marry the woman Lord Ashworth chose, and I will honor that word, if you are willing." Adriana's lips trembled slightly. "Willing? Does it matter if I'm willing? I was brought here with little explanation, told I was to marry a king I'd never met as part of some wager. My willingness seems rather beside the point." "It is not beside the point to me," Harold insisted. He moved closer again, close enough that he could speak more quietly. "Lady Adriana, I will not force you into this marriage. If you wish to leave, I will ensure you are returned safely to your family with provisions for your comfort and a story that preserves your honor. Lord Ashworth's wager be damned." He heard Ashworth sputter in protest behind him, but Harold ignored the man, focused entirely on the woman before him. Adriana's unfocused eyes seemed to search his face, though he knew she couldn't see it. Her hand rose tentatively, and after a moment's hesitation, she reached toward him. Harold stood very still as her fingers found his chest, then moved upward to his shoulder, his neck, and finally his face. She explored his features with gentle touches, her fingertips tracing his jaw, his cheekbones, the bridge of his nose. He realized she was trying to see him the only way she could, and he let her, barely breathing as her warm fingers mapped his face. "You are handsome," she said finally, a slight smile touching her lips. "Your Majesty need not worry about appearance in this match, at least from my perspective." Despite the tension of the moment, Harold felt himself smile. "I'm grateful for that, my lady." Her hand lingered on his cheek for a moment longer before dropping away. "You truly mean what you said? That I may leave if I wish?" "I do. And if I stay? If we proceed with this marriage? What would you expect of me?" It was a fair question, and Harold considered it carefully before answering. "I would expect you to be queen, with all the duties and honors that entails. I would expect you to stand beside me at court, to represent the crown with dignity. Beyond that," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Beyond that, I would hope we might find some measure of friendship in time." "Not love?" she asked, and he couldn't tell if there was mockery or genuine curiosity in her tone. "Love is not something that can be demanded or expected," Harold said. "It either grows or it doesn't. But friendship, mutual respect, partnership in ruling, these things can be built with effort and good faith." Adriana was quiet for a long moment, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, facing forward with new determination. "Then I will stay," she announced clearly. "I will marry you, Your Majesty, and I will be your queen. Not because I was brought here as part of a wager, but because you have shown me more kindness and respect in these few minutes than I have received from most people in my entire life." That seems as good a foundation as any for a marriage. Harold felt something warm unfold in his chest, a mixture of relief and admiration. This woman, thrust into an impossible situation, had found her dignity and claimed it fiercely. She was stronger than Ashworth had anticipated, stronger perhaps than Harold himself had expected. "Then let us proceed," Harold said, turning to Father Benedict. "If you would begin the ceremony, Father." The elderly priest nodded, though his expression showed he was still processing everything that had just transpired. He opened his prayer book with hands that shook slightly, whether from age or emotion Harold couldn't tell. "Dearly beloved," Father Benedict began, his reedy voice filling the chapel, "we are gathered here in the sight of God to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate, instituted by God." As the familiar words washed over him, Harold found his attention kept returning to Adriana. She stood straight and still beside him, her hands clasped before her, her face composed but not quite peaceful. He wondered what she was thinking, what she was feeling. Did she truly want this marriage, or was she simply making the best of a terrible situation? When Father Benedict asked if anyone knew of any impediment to the marriage, Ashworth remained silent, though Harold could feel the man's displeasure radiating from where he stood. The Lord had clearly expected a different outcome, and his plan had been thoroughly disrupted. "King Harold Thornwood," Father Benedict intoned, "do you take this woman, Lady Adriana Whitmore, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" Harold turned to face Adriana fully, taking both of her hands in his. "I do," he said firmly, meaning it more than he had expected to. "Lady Adriana Whitmore," the priest continued, "do you take this man, King Harold Thornwood, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" Adriana's voice was steady when she answered, "I do." Father Benedict smiled for the first time since the ceremony began. "Then by the power vested in me by God and this kingdom, I pronounce you husband and wife. Your Majesty, you may kiss your bride." Harold hesitated, aware that kissing a woman who couldn't see him coming might startle her. Instead, he gently raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. He heard her soft intake of breath and saw color rise in her cheeks. "Welcome to House Thornwood, my queen," he said quietly. The witnesses erupted into polite applause, though Harold noticed it was somewhat subdued. Most of them were still trying to process what they had witnessed, the unexpected turn the ceremony had taken. Ashworth looked absolutely furious, his face red and his hands clenched at his sides. As Harold turned to lead Adriana back down the aisle, Marcus stepped forward to offer his congratulations. "Your Majesty, your Grace," he said, bowing to them both. "May I be the first to wish you happiness in your marriage." "Thank you, Sir Marcus," Adriana said graciously. "The king has mentioned you are his closest friend and advisor. I hope we might also become friends, in time." Marcus looked genuinely touched. "I would be honored, your Grace." They processed out of the chapel, with Harold keeping a careful hand under Adriana's elbow to guide her. He could feel the tension in her body, the way she held herself rigidly, and he wondered if she was beginning to regret her decision now that the ceremony was complete. Once they were in the corridor outside the chapel, away from the immediate crowd of witnesses, Harold slowed their pace. "Are you well?" he asked quietly. "I am uncertain," Adriana admitted. "This day has been rather overwhelming." "I imagine it has," Harold agreed. "Would you like to rest before the celebration feast? We could delay it if needed." She shook her head. "No, let us proceed as planned. I would prefer to face whatever comes next, rather than hiding away and dreading it." Harold admired her courage, even as he recognized the fear beneath it. "Very well. But first, perhaps I should show you to your chambers. They've been prepared for you, and you'll want to freshen up before the feast." He guided her through the castle corridors, describing the route as they went so she could begin to form a mental map of her new home. Adriana listened intently, asking occasional questions about distances and landmarks. Her intelligence was evident in the way she processed the information, already beginning to adapt to her new environment. The Queen's chambers were in the same wing as Harold's own rooms, connected by a small private sitting room. The staff had outdone themselves in preparation, filling the space with fresh flowers and ensuring every surface was polished to gleaming. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, warming the room against the winter cold. "Your chambers, your Grace," Harold announced as they entered. He described the layout in detail, the placement of the furniture, the windows looking out over the gardens, the doorway leading to the private sitting room they would share. "It's beautiful," Adriana said, though Harold realized with a pang that she was taking his word for it, unable to verify it herself. "Would you like me to guide you around?" he offered, "so you can familiarize yourself with where everything is." She nodded gratefully, and for the next several minutes, Harold carefully led her through the room, letting her touch and explore each piece of furniture, each fixture, building her own understanding of the space through touch and description. As they worked, Harold found himself watching her face, fascinated by the concentration he saw there, the way her other senses seemed heightened to compensate for her lack of sight. She noticed the scent of the flowers, the warmth of the fire, the texture of the fabrics, experiencing the room in ways he had never considered. When they finished the tour of her chambers, Adriana sank into one of the chairs near the fire with visible relief. Harold noticed the weariness in her posture and realized how exhausting this entire day must have been for her, navigating unfamiliar territory both literally and figuratively. "Your Grace," came a soft voice from the doorway. A young woman entered, curtsying deeply. She had kind brown eyes and auburn hair braided neatly under a simple cap. "I am Meredith, assigned to serve as your lady's maid. If you would like assistance preparing for the feast." Adriana turned toward the voice, her expression brightening slightly. "Meredith? Yes, I would appreciate that very much." Harold took this as his cue to withdraw. "I will leave you to prepare then," he said. "The feast will begin in 2 hours. I'll return to escort you to the Great Hall." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Adriana said formally, and Harold caught the slight distance in her tone. The intimacy of their exploration of the room had faded, replaced by the proper formality expected between a king and queen who were essentially strangers. He returned to his own chambers, where Marcus waited with fresh clothing for the feast. His friend helped him change into a tunic of deep burgundy wool with gold embroidery, a heavy chain of office settling across his shoulders. That was quite a ceremony, Marcus observed as he worked. Not at all what anyone expected. "Least of all me," Harold admitted, sitting so Marcus could arrange his cloak properly. "When I saw her, Marcus, when I realized what Ashworth had done—" "You handled it well," Marcus assured him. "Better than well. You turned his trap into something else entirely." "Did I?" Harold asked. "Or did I simply spring the trap in a different way? I'm married now to a woman I don't know. A woman with challenges that will make her role as queen more difficult. A woman who showed remarkable courage and dignity," Marcus countered. "Did you see how she held herself? How she spoke? She could have crumbled, could have fled, but instead she chose to stand and face the situation with grace. Harold nodded slowly, remembering the moment Adriana had reached up to touch his face, trying to see him the only way she could. She is stronger than Ashworth anticipated, stronger than I anticipated if I'm honest. Then perhaps this marriage won't be the disaster everyone expects, Marcus suggested. Perhaps you've actually found something rare, Harold. A partner who values the same things you do. It's too early to know that, Harold cautioned, though he felt a flicker of hope at his friend's words. We've barely spoken. I don't know anything about her beyond her name and her condition. Then the feast will be your opportunity to learn, Marcus said, stepping back to inspect his work. You look every inch a king. Now go collect your queen and show the court that this marriage is real and will be honored. Harold made his way back to Adriana's chambers precisely 2 hours later, knocking softly before entering. What he found took his breath away. Adriana stood near the window, dressed in a gown of deep emerald green that brought out the unusual color of her eyes. The dress was more elaborate than her wedding gown, with long fitted sleeves and a bodice embroidered with silver thread in patterns of leaves and vines. Her golden hair had been arranged in an intricate braided style, with small white flowers woven through it. She wore a simple silver circlet on her head, marking her new status as queen. Your Grace, Harold said, finding his voice. You look magnificent. Adriana turned toward his voice, and he saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Meredith chose the gown. I hope it's appropriate. It's perfect, Harold assured her, moving to her side. Meredith stood nearby, beaming with pride at her work. The color suits you beautifully. A faint blush colored Adriana's cheeks. You are kind to say so, Your Majesty. Harold, he corrected gently. When we're in private, please call me Harold. All this Your Majesty business grows tiresome between husband and wife. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. Then you must call me Adriana, though I confess it will take some getting used to, being so informal with a king. I'm just a man, Harold said, offering her his arm. One who happens to wear a crown. Now shall we face the lions of the court together? Adriana placed her hand on his arm, her grip firm despite her obvious nervousness. Together, she agreed. They made their way through the castle corridors, Harold once again describing the route for Adriana's benefit. He noticed how she listened carefully, her head tilted slightly, absorbing every detail. When they passed servants or guards, he made a point of introducing them by name, helping Adriana begin to learn the voices of the people who served in the castle. As they approached the great hall, Harold could hear the buzz of conversation already underway. The feast had been arranged hastily, but his staff had risen to the challenge. Through the open doors, he could see tables laden with food, candles blazing in every sconce, and nobles dressed in their finest attire. It sounds like quite a gathering, Adriana murmured, her nervousness evident in the slight tremor of her voice. It is, Harold confirmed. But remember, you don't face them alone. I'm right here beside you. The herald's voice rang out as they paused at the entrance. His Majesty King Harold Thornwood and her Grace Queen Adriana. The hall fell silent as they entered, every eye turning to watch them. Harold felt Adriana's grip tighten on his arm, but she kept her head high and her expression serene as they walked toward the high table. He could only imagine how daunting this must be for her, entering a room full of people she couldn't see, knowing they were all judging her, evaluating her worthiness to be their queen. As they took their seats at the center of the high table, Harold saw Lord Ashworth sitting among the nobles, his expression still sour with disappointment. The man had been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. His lands would pass to the crown, and his attempt to humiliate the king had backfired spectacularly. Harold raised his goblet, and the hall gradually quieted. My lords and ladies, he began, his voice carrying easily through the space. We gather tonight to celebrate my marriage to Lady Adriana Whitmore, now Queen Adriana of House Thornwood. Many of you know that this marriage came about through unusual circumstances. Circumstances I will not pretend were entirely honorable on all sides. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled nobles, seeing shock on many faces at his bluntness. I made a reckless wager, driven by pride and anger. But what began as foolishness has resulted in something I believe may prove to be a blessing. I have found in my new queen a woman of remarkable courage, dignity, and strength. She faces challenges that would overwhelm many, yet she stands here tonight with grace and composure that humbles me. Adriana's hand found his under the table, squeezing gently. Harold squeezed back, drawing strength from her presence. "I ask that you welcome your queen with the respect and loyalty she deserves," Harold continued. "Judge her not by circumstances beyond her control, but by her character and her actions. I believe you will find, as I have begun to, that she is more than worthy of the crown she now wears." The applause that followed was genuine, building from polite acknowledgement to real enthusiasm. Harold saw many of the nobles looking at Adriana with new interest, reassessing their initial judgments. Even some of those who had seemed most skeptical appeared moved by his words. When Harold sat down, Adriana leaned slightly toward him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for those words, for your support." "You don't need to thank me for speaking the truth," Harold replied quietly. The feast proceeded with course after course of rich food. Harold took care to describe each dish to Adriana as it arrived, quietly guiding her hand to where things were placed so she could serve herself without assistance. He noticed how she handled her utensils with practiced ease, clearly accustomed to managing such tasks despite her blindness. Between courses, various nobles approached the high table to offer their congratulations. Harold made a point of introducing each one to Adriana, describing them briefly so she could begin to put voices to faces, or at least to positions and titles. Lady Eleanor Fairfax, an elderly noblewoman known for her sharp wit, studied Adriana carefully before speaking. "Your Grace, I must confess I was skeptical when I heard about this hasty marriage, but having seen you conduct yourself tonight, I believe His Majesty has chosen well." "Thank you, Lady Eleanor," Adriana responded graciously. "I hope I will prove worthy of your good opinion." "Oh, I think you will," Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling. "You have steel in your spine, girl. I can see it. The court will try to test you, but I suspect they'll find you're not so easily broken." After Eleanor moved away, Adriana turned to Harold with a slight smile. "She seems formidable." "She is," Harold agreed, "but she's also fair and honest. If she's on your side, it will carry weight with the other ladies of the court." As the evening wore on, Harold found himself relaxing somewhat. Adriana was handling the attention with remarkable poise, conversing with nobles when they approached, laughing at appropriate moments during the entertainment, and generally conducting herself exactly as a queen should. He realized that whatever challenges her blindness might present, a lack of intelligence or social grace was not among them. When the musicians began to play, couples started moving to the open area of the hall to dance. Harold felt Adriana stiffen beside him as she obviously heard the music and understood what was happening. "I suppose we should dance," she said quietly, though he heard the apprehension in her voice. "It's expected of us." "Only if you wish to," Harold replied. "We can simply watch if you prefer." She shook her head. "No, I should dance with my husband at our wedding feast. I haven't danced since I was a child, before I lost my sight. I'm not sure I remember how." Harold stood and offered his hand. "Then we'll figure it out together. I promise not to let you fall." Adriana placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the center of the hall. The other dancers cleared space for them, and the musicians began a slower, more stately tune, something easier to follow than the livelier dances that had preceded it. Harold positioned them carefully, one hand at Adriana's waist, the other holding her hand. "Feel the rhythm," he instructed quietly. "I'll guide you. Just follow my lead and trust me." "Trust," Adriana repeated softly. "That's asking quite a lot from someone you married only hours ago." "I know," Harold acknowledged, "but I'm asking anyway." They began to move, slowly at first, Harold keeping his steps simple and clear. Adriana stumbled slightly at first, uncertain of the pattern, but she was a quick learner. Within moments she had caught the rhythm, moving with him more smoothly, her body responding to the subtle pressure of his hand at her waist, guiding her through turns. "You're doing beautifully," Harold murmured, and he meant it. Despite her initial nervousness, Adriana danced with natural grace, her movements fluid and elegant. The emerald gown swirled around her legs as they turned, the candlelight catching in the silver embroidery. "I can hear them whispering," Adriana said quietly. "The nobles watching us. Are they scandalized? Pitying? Mocking?" Harold glanced around the hall, seeing the faces of the assembled court. "They're watching with interest," he reported honestly. "Some with surprise, I think. You're not what they expected." What did they expect? Someone broken, perhaps. Someone to be pitied or dismissed. Instead, they see a queen dancing at her wedding feast, holding her head high, conducting herself with dignity and grace. You're confounding their expectations, Adriana, just as you confounded mine. She looked up at him, her unfocused eyes somehow seeming to see straight into him. And is that a good thing? Confounding your expectations? Yes, Harold said firmly. It's a very good thing indeed. The dance ended, and polite applause rippled through the hall. Harold led Adriana back to their seats, noticing how she was breathing slightly harder, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. She looked alive and vibrant in a way she hadn't earlier, the nervousness temporarily forgotten in the pleasure of the dance. Marcus appeared at Harold's elbow, bowing to them both. "Your Majesties, if I might have a word?" Harold nodded, and Marcus leaned in to speak quietly. "Ashworth is preparing to leave. He's demanded a private audience before he goes." "Let him wait," Harold said dismissively. "He can cool his heels until I'm ready to see him." "Actually," Adriana interjected, surprising them both, "perhaps you should see him now, while the feast continues. Get it over with. He'll only cause trouble if left to stew in his resentment." Harold looked at his new wife with renewed respect. She was right, of course. Better to deal with Ashworth now, settle the matter of the wager, and be done with it. "Your wisdom serves you well, my queen," Harold said. He turned to Marcus. "Very well. Bring Ashworth to my study. I'll meet him there shortly." Marcus bowed and departed. Harold turned back to Adriana. "Will you be all right here without me for a short while?" "I'll be fine," Adriana assured him. "Lady Eleanor has been hovering nearby, clearly wanting another conversation. I'll speak with her and the other ladies while you attend to business." Harold hesitated, reluctant to leave her alone so soon, but Adriana seemed confident. As if summoned by their discussion, Lady Eleanor appeared at Adriana's side, already launching into conversation about the quality of the musicians. Taking his leave, Harold made his way through the castle to his private study, the same room where he had paced nervously just days before, wondering what manner of woman Ashworth would choose. Now he knew, and the reality was so different from anything he had imagined. Ashworth was already waiting when Harold entered, pacing before the fire like a caged animal. The Lord turned sharply as Harold closed the door behind him. "Your Majesty," Ashworth said stiffly, "I've come to discuss the terms of our wager." "The terms are simple," Harold replied, moving to stand behind his desk. "You chose a bride for me. I married her. You lost. Your lands are forfeit to the crown." Ashworth's face reddened. "You cannot truly intend to hold me to that. The wager was made in jest, fueled by wine and temper. It was witnessed by half the court," Harold countered coldly, "and you seemed quite serious about it at the time. What's changed, Lord Ashworth? Did you expect me to reject Lady Adriana? Were you counting on my supposed vanity and shallowness to prove your point?" "She's blind," Ashworth burst out. "How can she possibly fulfill the duties of a queen? How can she provide you with heirs when she cannot even navigate a room without assistance?" Harold's hands clenched on the desk. "Lady Adriana's blindness has nothing to do with her ability to bear children, as you well know. As for her other duties, I have every confidence she will manage them admirably. She has already shown more grace and strength than many fully sighted nobles I could name." "This is madness," Ashworth insisted. "You're allowing your pride to blind you, if you'll pardon the expression. In time, you'll come to resent her limitations, resent the burden she represents. And when you do, remember that I gave you an out. I gave you a way to acknowledge the truth." "The truth?" Harold repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "The truth is that you tried to manipulate me into proving your cynical worldview correct. You chose Lady Adriana specifically because you thought her blindness would make her unacceptable to me. You didn't consider her feelings, her dignity, or her worth as a person. You used her as a pawn in your petty game, and that is unforgivable." Ashworth's expression twisted with anger and frustration. "Unforgivable? I played by the rules of your own wager, Your Majesty. You said you valued character over appearance, that you would know a worthy queen by her heart and mind. I merely tested that claim, by selecting someone you believe no one could possibly want." Harold shot back. "Tell me, Lord Ashworth, what gave you the right to decide that Lady Adriana's blindness makes her less worthy? Have you spent even a moment in her company? Have you spoken with her, learned anything about her character or intelligence?" Ashworth shifted uncomfortably. "I know her family. The Whitmores are respectable enough, minor nobility from the Western Territories. The girl was blinded in childhood by some illness. Her father despaired of ever finding her a suitable match. So you offered him one, Harold surmised. What did you promise Lord Whitmore? What lies did you tell him about this arrangement? The Lord had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I told him that you were seeking a bride of good character and noble birth. I may have omitted certain details about the nature of the arrangement. You mean you didn't tell him it was part of a wager designed to humiliate both his daughter and your king? Harold said flatly. How very honorable of you. Her father was grateful for the opportunity, Ashworth protested. The girl had no prospects. At least this way she's a queen, even if the marriage proves unsustainable. Harold came around the desk, his impressive size and barely controlled anger making Ashworth take an involuntary step backward. The marriage will not prove unsustainable, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I will not give you that satisfaction. Queen Adriana will have my full support and respect, and she will succeed in her role. And you, Lord Ashworth, will begin the process of transferring your lands to the crown immediately. You cannot be serious, Ashworth breathed. Those lands have been in my family for generations. Then perhaps your ancestors are fortunate they cannot see what you've become, Harold replied coldly. A man who would use an innocent woman as a tool for his political schemes, who would gamble with her dignity and future for the sake of proving a point. Ashworth's face had gone from red to pale. The council will never approve this. They'll see it for what it is, a king acting out of spite rather than justice. The council will see a lord who made a wager before witnesses and lost, Harold corrected. Unless you wish to argue that you shouldn't be held to your word? That would be an interesting position for a man who claims to value honor and tradition. The lord stood silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his options. Finally he spoke, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Very well, your majesty. I will begin the transfer of my lands. But mark my words, this marriage will fail. The girl is not suited to be queen, and eventually you will see that. When you do, I hope you'll remember this moment and recognize your own foolishness. Get out, Harold ordered. And if I hear that you've spoken a single word against Queen Adriana, if you spread any gossip or attempt to undermine her position in any way, I will ensure that losing your lands is the least of your worries. Am I understood? Ashworth bowed stiffly and left without another word. Harold stood alone in his study, the anger slowly draining away to be replaced by weariness. He moved to the window, looking out over the castle grounds dusted with snow, and wondered if Ashworth might be right. Not about Adriana's worth. He was already certain she had value far beyond what the Lord had recognized, but about the challenges they would face. Could a blind woman truly serve as queen? Could she navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, manage the complex duties of her position, stand beside him as a true partner in ruling the kingdom? He wanted to believe it was possible, but doubt gnawed at him. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called. Marcus stepped in, closing the door behind him. Ashworth just stormed past me looking like he'd swallowed poison. I take it the conversation went well. Despite himself, Harold smiled slightly. He's going to transfer his lands to the crown, though not happily. Good, Marcus said firmly. The man deserved to lose them after what he tried to do. He paused, studying Harold's face. But that's not what's troubling you now, is it? Harold returned to his desk, sinking into the chair with a heavy sigh. What if he's right, Marcus? Not about Adriana's worth as a person, but about the practical challenges. What if I've bound myself to a woman who simply cannot fulfill the role of queen, through no fault of her own? Marcus settled into the chair across from him, his expression thoughtful. Have you considered that perhaps the role of queen needs to be reconsidered? That maybe we've been too rigid in our expectations of what a queen should be and do? What do you mean? I mean that every queen before Adriana could see, so we designed the role around that ability, Marcus explained. But that doesn't mean those duties are inherently tied to sight. With some adjustments, some creative thinking, I believe Adriana could fulfill most, if not all, of the traditional responsibilities. Harold leaned forward, interested despite his doubts. Give me an example. Well, queens typically oversee the household management, the servants, the supplies, Marcus began. Adriana can't see the account books, but she could have them read to her. She can't visually inspect the work of servants, but she could develop other methods of ensuring quality. She's clearly intelligent and capable of learning. We just need to adapt. And what about court functions? Harold pressed. Greeting foreign dignitaries, hosting feasts, all the social duties that require reading people's expressions. understanding the subtle cues of body language. She'll develop other ways of reading people, Marcus suggested. She already seems quite adept at interpreting tone of voice and other auditory cues. And you'll be there to support her, to be her eyes when needed. This doesn't have to be a burden she carries alone. Harold considered his friend's words, feeling some of his doubt beginning to ease. You make it sound almost simple. It won't be simple, Marcus admitted. It will require effort from both of you, and from everyone who serves in the court. But I think it's possible. More than that, I think Adriana has already proven she has the strength and determination to succeed. Did you see how she handled herself tonight? The grace, the poise. She was remarkable. She was, Harold agreed, feeling warmth spread through his chest at the memory of Adriana dancing, her face lit with pleasure and concentration. She is remarkable. Marcus grinned. You're already halfway in love with her, aren't you? Don't be ridiculous, Harold protested, though he felt heat rise in his face. I barely know the woman. You don't have to know someone long to recognize something special, Marcus said. I saw how you looked at her during the feast, how carefully you described everything to her, how you made sure she felt included and valued. You're already acting like a man who cares deeply. Harold wanted to argue, but he couldn't quite find the words. The truth was, something about Adriana had captured his attention in a way no other woman ever had. Perhaps it was her courage in the face of impossible circumstances, or the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, or simply the way she had touched his face, trying to see him with her fingertips. I should return to the feast, Harold said, rising from his chair. I've been gone too long already. Go to your wife, Marcus agreed, standing as well. And Harold? Stop worrying so much about whether this can work. Just focus on getting to know her, on building that friendship you mentioned. The rest will follow. Harold clapped his friend on the shoulder gratefully and made his way back to the great hall. The feast was still in full swing, though he noticed some of the older nobles had begun to depart. He scanned the crowd for Adriana and found her still seated at the high table, engaged in animated conversation with Lady Eleanor and several other noblewomen. Her face was animated, her hands gesturing as she spoke, and he could hear her laughter ringing out clear and genuine. As he approached, Lady Eleanor spotted him and smiled knowingly. Ah, His Majesty returns. We've been thoroughly enjoying Her Grace's company in your absence. I'm glad to hear it, Harold said, resuming his seat beside Adriana. I hope my wife hasn't been sharing too many embarrassing stories about me. Adriana turned toward him with a smile. On the contrary, I have no embarrassing stories to share. Yet, though Lady Eleanor has been quite forthcoming about your childhood escapades. Has she now? Harold shot Eleanor a mock glare, which only made the old woman laugh. Someone needs to ensure the new queen knows what she's gotten herself into, Eleanor said with a wink. Besides, the stories are all quite charming, like the time you tried to knight all the stable cats and insisted they be allowed at the high table. I was 6 years old, Harold protested, though he couldn't help smiling at the memory. And I maintain that Sir Whiskers was a noble and valiant warrior. Adriana laughed, a sound that Harold was quickly coming to treasure. I would very much like to hear more of these stories. Then you shall have them, Eleanor promised. But perhaps not all tonight. You both look weary, and it's been quite a day. She was right, Harold realized. The events of the day were catching up with him, and he could see signs of exhaustion in Adriana's face as well, despite her attempts to hide it. The feast had gone on for hours, and they had been the center of attention throughout. Perhaps we should retire, Harold suggested quietly to Adriana. If you're ready? He saw relief flash across her face. Yes, I think I would like that. They made their farewells to the remaining guests, enduring the knowing looks and barely concealed smirks that accompanied any newly married couple's departure from their wedding feast. Harold kept his expression neutral and dignified as he offered Adriana his arm and led her from the hall. The walk back to their chambers was quiet, both of them seemingly lost in their own thoughts. Harold was acutely aware that this was their wedding night, that there were certain expectations attached to that, but he was also aware that this marriage had been thrust upon both of them with little warning or preparation. He had no intention of forcing anything. When they reached the small sitting room that connected their chambers, Harold paused. Adriana, I want you to know that you need not feel pressured about tonight. We can take this slowly. She turned toward him, her expression difficult to read in the flickering candlelight. You're being very considerate. More considerate than most husbands would be, I imagine. I just want you to be comfortable, Harold said. We're in this together, remember? Adriana nodded slowly. Together. Yes. She hesitated, seeming to struggle with something. Harold, may I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really go through with the marriage? I understand about the wager, about your pride and Lord Ashworth's manipulation. But when you saw me, when you realized I was blind, you could have backed out. You could have claimed the wager was void because Ashworth had chosen someone unfit. Why didn't you? Harold considered the question carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. Several reasons, he said finally. Partly because I was angry at Ashworth for using you as a pawn, and I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. Partly because my pride wouldn't let me back down from a challenge. But mostly, he paused, searching for the right words. Mostly because when I spoke with you, when you touched my face and asked if you could leave, and I saw the strength in you, the dignity despite the humiliation of the situation, I thought that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the disaster everyone assumed it would be. Adriana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I was so frightened when Lord Ashworth came to my father's house. He said a great lord wanted to marry me, but he wouldn't tell me who or why. My father was ecstatic, couldn't believe our good fortune. But I knew something was wrong. Men don't seek out blind women as wives, not without ulterior motives. I'm sorry you had to experience that fear, Harold said softly. It wasn't fair to you. Nothing in my life has been fair since I lost my sight, Adriana replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into her tone. I was 12 years old when the fever took my vision. One day I could see the world. The next, everything was darkness. My mother died giving birth to my younger brother the following year, and my father has never quite known what to do with a blind daughter. I've spent the last 11 years being treated as either a burden or an object of pity. The raw honesty in her words pierced Harold's heart. He stepped closer, wanting to offer comfort but unsure how. You are neither a burden nor an object of pity, he said firmly. You are a queen, my queen, and you will be treated with the respect that position demands. Adriana's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You keep saying things like that, being kind to me, and I don't know how to respond. I'm not used to kindness without conditions. Then get used to it, Harold said, because I meant what I said earlier. I will support you in this role, Adriana. We'll figure out how to make it work together. A tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. Harold reached up instinctively, gently brushing it away with his thumb. Adriana drew in a sharp breath at the touch, and Harold suddenly became aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers. I should let you rest, he said, though he found himself reluctant to step away. It's been an exhausting day. Yes, Adriana agreed, but she didn't move either. They stood frozen for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither quite knew how to name. Finally, Harold forced himself to step back. Good night, Adriana. If you need anything, I'm just through that door. Good night, Harold, she replied softly. He retreated to his own chambers, where his manservant waited to help him prepare for bed. As he changed out of his formal attire and into a simple sleeping tunic, his mind replayed the events of the day. This morning he had been a bachelor king, stubbornly resistant to marriage. Tonight he was a husband, bound to a woman who was both more and less than he had ever imagined. He dismissed his servant and climbed into bed, but sleep eluded him. He kept thinking about Adriana in the next room, wondering if she was finding it as difficult to sleep as he was. The marriage had been consummated in the eyes of the law. They had spoken their vows and been pronounced husband and wife, but in every other sense, they were still strangers feeling their way toward understanding. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Harold's bedchamber, pulling him from a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. He lay still for a moment, staring at the canopy above his bed, before the events of the previous day came rushing back. He was married, to a woman he barely knew, a woman who was currently sleeping in the chambers adjacent to his own. Harold rose and dressed himself in simple clothing, a wool tunic and leather breeches, preferring to forego his servant's assistance this morning. He needed time to think, to plan how to proceed with this unexpected marriage. As he pulled on his boots, he heard movement from the sitting room that connected their chambers. He opened his door to find Adriana already awake, seated in one of the chairs near the window. She wore a dressing gown of soft blue fabric, her golden hair loose around her shoulders. Meredith hovered nearby, clearly having just brought breakfast. "Good morning," Harold said, causing both women to turn toward him. Meredith curtsied quickly and excused herself, leaving them alone. "Good morning," Adriana replied. "I hope I didn't disturb you." Meredith said the sitting room was shared space, and I wanted to feel the morning sun. "I can return to my chambers if you prefer privacy." "No, please stay," Harold said, moving to join her. "This is your space as much as mine. How did you sleep?" A wry smile touched her lips. "Honestly, poorly. Everything is so new and strange. I kept waking, disoriented, forgetting where I was." "I slept poorly as well," Harold admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "Though for different reasons, I think." "Regrets already, Your Majesty?" There was a teasing quality to her voice, but Harold detected an undercurrent of genuine concern. "Harold," he reminded her gently. "And no, not regrets, just uncertainty about how to proceed. I've never been married before, obviously, and I suspect the usual advice for newlyweds doesn't quite apply to our situation." Adriana laughed softly. "No, I suppose get to know each other slowly is difficult when you're immediately thrust into the public eye as king and queen. We don't have the luxury of a normal courtship. Then perhaps we should create our own version," Harold suggested. "We could spend time together each day, just the two of us. Talk, learn about each other. Build that friendship I mentioned." "I would like that," Adriana said, her expression warming. "Though I imagine you have many duties that will demand your time." "I do," Harold acknowledged. "But a king who neglects his queen neglects an important duty as well. I'll make the time." He paused, considering. "What would you like to do today? How can I help you begin to feel more comfortable here?" Adriana thought for a moment, her fingers playing with the fabric of her dressing gown. "I'd like to learn the castle better. Yesterday you showed me my chambers, but the rest is still a mystery. If I'm to live here, to be queen here, I need to understand the layout, to be able to move through it with some confidence." "Then that's what we'll do," Harold decided. "After breakfast, I'll give you a proper tour. We'll map out the important areas, the routes you'll need to know, and I'll introduce you to more of the staff so you can begin to learn their voices." They shared breakfast together, an informal meal of bread, cheese, and fruit. Harold found himself studying Adriana as they ate, noticing details he'd been too overwhelmed to observe the previous day. The way she tilted her head when listening carefully, the graceful movements of her hands, the small furrow that appeared between her brows when she was concentrating. "You're staring at me," Adriana said, suddenly startling him. "I can feel it." "How can you possibly know that?" Harold asked, genuinely curious. "I can sense attention," she explained. "It's difficult to describe, but when someone focuses on me intently, there's a quality to their presence, to the air around them, that changes." "And you've been very still and quiet for the past few minutes." "I apologize," Harold said. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I was just observing you, trying to learn who you are." "And what have you learned?" she asked, a challenge in her tone. Harold considered carefully. "That you're more observant than most people who can see, that you use all your other senses to compensate for what you can't observe visually, that you're intelligent and quick-witted, and that you have a sense of humor that shows even when you're nervous." Adriana's cheeks colored slightly. "That's quite a lot to discern from watching me eat breakfast." "I'm a trained observer," Harold said. "It's an essential skill for a king, reading people, understanding their motivations and capabilities." "And what do you think my motivations are?" Adriana asked. "To survive," Harold answered honestly. "To make the best of an impossible situation. To prove yourself worthy despite the doubts of others. Am I wrong?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "You're not wrong. Though I would add one more motivation. To find happiness, if possible, in this new life. I don't want to merely survive, Harold. I want to live." The intensity in her voice moved him. "Then we'll work toward that together," he promised, "starting with making you feel at home in this castle." True to his word, Harold spent the next several hours guiding Adriana through Thornwick Castle. They began with the main corridors, Harold pacing out distances and describing landmarks she could use to orient herself. He explained that the East Wing held the royal chambers and private apartments, while the West Wing contained the Great Hall and formal receiving rooms. The North Tower housed guest chambers and storage, while the South Tower held the library and the council chamber. Adriana listened intently, occasionally asking questions or requesting that they retrace a path so she could commit it to memory. Harold was impressed by how quickly she learned, how she created mental maps using the texture of the floor beneath her feet. the echo of their voices in different spaces, the scent of various rooms. In the great hall, Harold introduced her to the servants who were cleaning after the previous night's feast. "This is Thomas, the head steward," he said, guiding Adriana's hand to shake the older man's. "He manages the household staff and coordinates all the formal events." "Your Grace," Thomas said, bowing deeply, "I am at your service. If you need anything at all, you have only to ask." "Thank you, Thomas," Adriana said warmly. "I'm certain I'll be relying on your expertise quite often as I learn my duties." They moved through the kitchens, where Harold introduced her to Margaret, the head cook, a robust woman with flour-dusted hands and a kind face. "Your Grace, it's an honor," Margaret said. "I hope the wedding feast met with your approval." "It was delicious," Adriana assured her, "though I confess I was too nervous to eat as much as I should have. The king described each dish to me, and they all sounded wonderful." Margaret beamed with pleasure. "You must tell me what foods you prefer, Your Grace, so I can prepare meals to your liking." As they continued the tour, Harold noticed how Adriana engaged with each person they met, asking questions, expressing genuine interest in their roles and responsibilities. The servants, who had been wary and uncertain about their blind queen, began to warm to her natural friendliness and obvious intelligence. By midday, they had covered most of the main areas of the castle. Harold led Adriana to the library, one of his favorite rooms. "This is where I spent much of my childhood," he explained as they entered. "The library holds thousands of books, manuscripts, and maps collected by generations of my family." Adriana's face lit up with interest. "I love books," she said wistfully. "Or I did, before I lost my sight. My mother used to read to me for hours." Harold felt a pang of sympathy. "Just because you can't read them yourself doesn't mean you can't enjoy them," he said. "I could read to you if you'd like, or we could arrange for someone else to do so regularly." "You would do that?" Adriana asked, her voice filled with surprised pleasure. "A king has time to read to his wife?" "This king will make time," Harold said firmly. He guided her to one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace. "What sort of stories do you enjoy?" "Adventures," Adriana said immediately. "Tales of brave knights in distant lands. Stories where people overcome impossible odds and find their happy endings." Harold smiled, moving to the shelves to select a book. "I think I have just the thing." He returned with a well-worn volume. "This is a collection of tales from the time of Arthur. My father used to read them to me." He settled into the chair beside hers and began to read, his deep voice bringing the ancient words to life. Adriana leaned back in her chair, her face relaxed and content as she listened. Harold found himself enjoying the experience as much as she seemed to, the simple pleasure of sharing something he loved with someone who appreciated it. They had been reading for perhaps an hour when Marcus appeared in the doorway, clearing his throat apologetically. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the council is waiting. We have the matter of Lord Ashworth's lands to discuss, among other business." Harold closed the book with reluctance. "Of course, I'd forgotten." He turned to Adriana. "I'm sorry, I need to attend to this. It shouldn't take more than a few hours." "I understand," Adriana said graciously. "You have a kingdom to run. I'll be fine." "Meredith can escort you back to your chambers," Harold suggested, but Adriana shook her head. "Actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to stay here for a while. The library is peaceful, and I've memorized the route from here to our chambers. I can find my way back when I'm ready." Harold hesitated, worried about leaving her alone in an unfamiliar place, but he saw the quiet determination in her expression and realized she needed to prove to herself that she could navigate independently. "All right," he agreed. "But if you need anything, Thomas is usually in the Great Hall, and he can send someone to fetch me if necessary." After Harold departed with Marcus, Adriana sat quietly in the library, listening to the subtle sounds around her. She could hear the crackling of the fire, the slight whisper of wind through the high windows, and somewhere distant, the voices of servants going about their duties. She rose carefully from her chair and began to explore the room, using the techniques she had developed over the years since losing her sight. She trailed her fingers along the shelves, feeling the leather spines of countless books, imagining the knowledge contained within them, forever locked away from her now. "Your Grace?" Adriana turned toward the voice, unfamiliar and hesitant. "Yes? I'm Brother Timothy, the castle librarian," the man said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I saw you here alone and wanted to ensure you had everything you needed." "Thank you, Brother Timothy," Adriana said. The king was reading to me before he was called away to council business. I was just exploring a bit. Ah, yes, His Majesty has always loved this library, Timothy said warmly. Even as a boy, he would spend hours here, reading everything he could get his hands on. He paused. Your Grace, if I may be so bold, I wanted to express my admiration for your courage. It cannot be easy, taking on the role of queen under such unusual circumstances. Adriana smiled slightly. You're very kind. Though I suspect courage is a generous word for what is mostly necessity and stubborn refusal to be defeated by my limitations. I think that's the very definition of courage, Timothy replied. Your Grace, I wonder if I might show you something. There's a section of the library that might interest you particularly. Intrigued, Adriana allowed him to guide her across the room. She heard him moving books, the soft scrape of leather against wood, and then his voice again. These are some of the oldest texts in the collection, he explained. Many are written in languages few can read anymore, but some are quite special. He placed something in her hands. Feel the surface. Adriana ran her fingers over the pages and gasped. The letters are raised. Indeed, Timothy said with pleasure. These texts were created by monks who used a special technique of pressing the letters into the parchment so they stood out from the surface. It was meant to make them more durable, but it has an interesting side effect. I can read them, Adriana breathed, her fingers carefully tracing the raised letters. It was slow, painstaking work, and many of the words were in Latin which she only partially understood, but the fact that she could feel the letters, could decode them through touch, filled her with a joy she hadn't felt in years. This is just one text, Timothy said gently. But if you wished, Your Grace, I could work on creating more texts in this style. It would take time, but it's possible. You could have books again, in a manner of speaking. Adriana felt tears prick her eyes. Brother Timothy, that would be the most wonderful gift imaginable. Thank you. She spent the next hour with the librarian, exploring the raised letter text and discussing the possibility of creating more. When she finally made her way back to her chambers, using the mental map she had created during the morning's tour, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Harold returned from the council meeting to find Adriana in the sitting room, her face animated as she described her discovery to Meredith. He paused in the doorway, watching the way her hands moved expressively as she spoke, the genuine excitement in her voice. It seems you had a productive afternoon, he observed, announcing his presence. Adriana turned toward him with a brilliant smile. Harold, Brother Timothy showed me the most amazing thing. Did you know there are books in your library with raised letters? I can read them by touch. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Harold found himself grinning in response. I did know about those texts, actually, though I'd never considered their potential use for someone who couldn't see. What a clever observation from Brother Timothy. He's offered to create more texts in that style. Adriana continued eagerly. It will be time-consuming, but he says it's possible. Harold, I could have books again, stories, histories, everything I've missed since I lost my sight. Harold crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Then we'll ensure Brother Timothy has whatever resources he needs to make that happen. Paper, ink, assistance if necessary. This is important. Adriana's smile softened, her excitement giving way to something deeper. You keep doing this, she said quietly. Supporting me, making accommodations, treating my needs as important rather than burdensome. Why? Because they are important, Harold said simply. Because you're important. You're my wife, my queen, and your happiness and success matter to me. We've only known each other a day, Adriana pointed out, though she didn't pull her hands away from his. And yet I find I care what happens to you, Harold admitted. Perhaps it's simply because we're bound together now, or perhaps it's something more. Either way, I meant what I said yesterday. We're in this together. The weeks that followed established a pattern of sorts. Each morning, Harold and Adriana would breakfast together in their shared sitting room, discussing the day ahead. Harold would attend to his duties as king, meeting with advisors, reviewing petitions, and managing the affairs of the realm, while Adriana worked with Brother Timothy in the library, slowly building her collection of tactile texts and learning the intricacies of managing the royal household under Thomas's patient guidance. The castle staff had initially been uncertain about serving a blind queen, but Adriana's warmth and determination won them over. She developed a system of bells and specific footstep patterns so she could identify who was approaching, and she spent hours memorizing voices and learning the routines of the household. Margaret the cook became particularly fond of her, teaching her to identify herbs and spices by scent and inviting her to help plan menus. The nobility, however, proved more challenging. At the required court gatherings, Adriana faced whispers and poorly concealed skepticism. Some nobles were outright cruel in their remarks, assuming she couldn't hear or understand the cutting comments made just loud enough to reach her ears. It was at one such gathering, 3 weeks into their marriage, that tensions finally came to a head. Harold sat on his throne with Adriana beside him in the smaller queen's throne that had been brought out of storage and refurbished. They were hearing petitions from various lords and ladies, a tedious but necessary duty. Lady Catherine Thornwell approached, a widow of substantial wealth and influence who had long harbored ambitions of marrying Harold herself. She wore an elaborate gown of purple silk, her dark hair piled high and adorned with jewels. Her curtsy was perfunctory, and her eyes, when they landed on Adriana, were cold. "Your Majesties," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I come before you with a matter of some delicacy. It concerns the upcoming harvest festival." "Proceed," Harold said, though he felt himself tense. He knew Catherine well enough to recognize when she was plotting something. "Traditionally, the Queen oversees the festival preparations," Catherine continued. "She inspects the decorations, judges the competitions, and leads the dancing. However, given her Grace's limitations, I thought perhaps it would be wise to appoint someone else to these duties this year, to spare her any embarrassment, you understand." The implication was clear, and Harold saw Adriana's hands tighten on the arms of her throne. Before he could respond, however, his queen spoke. "How thoughtful of you to be concerned for my dignity, Lady Catherine," Adriana said, her voice calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "However, I assure you that I am quite capable of fulfilling my duties as queen, including overseeing the harvest festival." Catherine's smile turned pitying. "Your Grace, I mean no disrespect, but how can you possibly judge a decorating competition when you cannot see the decorations? How can you lead the dancing when you cannot see where you're going? I'm simply trying to prevent an unfortunate situation." "You're trying to undermine the Queen's authority," Harold said sharply, his patience exhausted. "And you're doing so in front of the entire court, which borders on treason." Catherine paled slightly, but held her ground. "I am merely being practical, Your Majesty. Surely you see the wisdom in having someone more suited to the task handle these traditional duties." "What I see," Harold said, rising from his throne, his impressive height and barely controlled anger making several nobles step back nervously, "is a woman who mistakes her own prejudices for wisdom. The harvest festival will proceed as it always has, with the Queen overseeing the preparations. If you doubt Her Grace's abilities, you are welcome to volunteer your services to assist her. Otherwise, I suggest you keep your concerns to yourself." Catherine opened her mouth to protest, but Harold cut her off with a sharp gesture. "This audience is concluded. Leave us." The noblewoman retreated, her face flushed with humiliation and anger. The other petitioners quickly found reasons to depart as well, sensing the king's foul mood. Within minutes, Harold and Adriana were alone in the throne room, except for the guards stationed at the doors. Harold turned to his wife, taking her hand. "I apologize for Catherine's rudeness. She had no right to speak to you that way." "She had a point, though, didn't she?" Adriana said quietly. "How am I supposed to oversee a festival when I can't see any of it?" "The same way you've managed everything else," Harold replied firmly. "With intelligence, creativity, and help from those around you. We'll figure it out together." Adriana shook her head, frustration evident in every line of her body. "You keep saying that. We'll figure it out together. But Harold, there are limits to what I can do. I can't pretend my blindness doesn't create real challenges." "I'm not asking you to pretend anything," Harold said, moving to stand directly in front of her. "I'm asking you to trust that we can find solutions to those challenges. You've already proven that you can adapt and overcome. Why do you doubt yourself now?" "Because this is public," Adriana burst out, rising from her throne. "When I make mistakes in private, when I stumble or misjudge distances or need help, it's just between us and the servants who are too loyal or too kind to comment. But at a festival with hundreds of people watching, every stumble will be noted. Every moment of confusion will be whispered about." "Lady Catherine is right. I'll embarrass myself and you." Harold caught her hands, holding them firmly. "You won't embarrass me. Nothing you could do would embarrass me. But if you truly don't want to oversee the festival, if it's too much, then we'll find another solution. Not because I think you're incapable, but because I won't force you into a situation that causes you genuine distress." Adriana's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate feeling weak and uncertain. I hate that people look at me with pity or scorn. I hate that I can't just be a normal queen." "There's no such thing as a normal queen," Harold said gently. "Every queen before you had her own strengths and weaknesses, her own struggles and triumphs. You're not less than them because you can't see. You're just different, and different can be powerful if we let it be." "How can being blind be powerful?" Adriana asked, a bitter laugh escaping her. Harold thought for a moment. "You experience the world in ways most people never consider. You notice things others miss because they're too focused on visual cues. You've developed empathy and understanding that comes from knowing what it's like to be dismissed and underestimated. Those aren't weaknesses, Adriana. Those are strengths, if you choose to use them that way." Adriana was quiet, considering his words. Finally, she straightened her shoulders, a familiar determination settling over her features. "All right," she said. "I'll oversee the festival, but I'll need help, real help, not just people humoring me." "You'll have it," Harold promised, "starting with me." Over the next 2 weeks, Harold threw himself into helping Adriana prepare for the Harvest Festival with the same intensity he brought to military campaigns. Together with Marcus, Thomas, and a handful of trusted servants, they developed systems and strategies to ensure Adriana could fulfill her duties effectively. For the decorating competition, Thomas would describe each entry in detail, while Adriana judged based on the creativity and thoughtfulness of the designs, rather than simply their visual appeal. For the various contests and games, she would rely on the judgments of appointed officials, but make the final decisions herself, based on their reports. The dancing proved more challenging until Marcus suggested that Adriana lead the first dance with Harold, as was traditional, but then have the celebration shift to more structured group dances where everyone followed the same patterns. Adriana could participate in those without needing to see, moving with the rhythm and flow of the other dancers. As the festival day approached, Harold noticed changes in Adriana. She moved through the castle with increasing confidence, no longer hesitating at doorways or seeming uncertain of her surroundings. She had memorized the locations of furniture, the distances between rooms, and the voices of dozens of staff members. More than that, she had begun to assert herself as queen, making decisions about household management and offering opinions in council meetings when Harold invited her to attend. Their relationship had also deepened in ways Harold hadn't anticipated. They spent their evenings together in the library, Harold reading to her from various texts while she worked on embroidery, her fingers creating intricate patterns by touch alone. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes and fears, their views on everything from politics to philosophy. Harold found himself watching for her smile, listening for her laugh, seeking her opinion on matters large and small. When he had to travel to a nearby town to settle a dispute between two lords, he missed her presence so acutely that he cut the trip short, returning a day earlier than planned. "You're falling in love with her," Marcus observed one evening as they reviewed security arrangements for the festival. "You know that, don't you?" Harold looked up from the map spread before them. "I care for her deeply." "That's not what I said," Marcus replied with a knowing smile. "I said you're falling in love with her. The way you look at her, the way you prioritize her needs, the way you light up when she enters a room. Those aren't the actions of a man who merely cares. Those are the actions of a man in love." Harold wanted to argue, but he couldn't quite find the words to deny it. The truth was, somewhere between the wedding ceremony and now, his feelings for Adriana had transformed from protective concern to something far deeper and more complex. He looked forward to their time together with an eagerness that had nothing to do with duty, and everything to do with genuine desire for her company. "Does she know?" Marcus asked more gently. "Have you told her?" "No," Harold admitted. "How can I? This marriage was forced upon her through my own foolish pride. She agreed to it to avoid greater shame and hardship, not because she chose me freely. To burden her with declarations of love when she may not feel the same would be cruel. Or it might give her permission to acknowledge her own feelings," Marcus suggested. "Harold, I've watched you both over these past weeks. The way she seeks you out, the way she touches your hand when she thinks no one is watching, the way her whole demeanor softens when you enter a room. I don't think you're alone in your feelings. You can't know that, Harold protested. Neither can you, unless you talk to her, Marcus countered. But perhaps the festival isn't the time for such conversations. Let her have her triumph first. Prove to herself in the court that she can succeed. Then, when the pressure is off, you can explore where your hearts truly lie. The morning of the harvest festival dawned clear and bright. The castle grounds had been transformed overnight, with colorful banners hanging from every surface and tables laden with food stretching across the courtyards. Merchants had set up stalls selling their wares, musicians tuned their instruments, and the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air. Harold found Adriana in her chambers, dressed in a magnificent gown of deep gold that complemented her hair and brought out the warmth in her skin. The dress was embroidered with autumn leaves in shades of red and brown, and she wore a delicate crown of woven golden wheat on her head. "You look beautiful," Harold said honestly, and saw pleasure flush her cheeks. "Meredith chose well," Adriana replied. "I can feel the texture of the embroidery. It's exquisite. Are you ready?" Harold asked, offering his arm. Adriana took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's show the court what their queen can do." They descended to the festival grounds together, and Harold felt Adriana's grip tighten on his arm as the noise and activity of the celebration surrounded them. He could only imagine how overwhelming it must be, unable to see the sources of all the sounds and movement. "The main courtyard is directly ahead," he murmured, continuing their established practice of describing their surroundings. "There are perhaps 200 people gathered already, with more arriving constantly. Thomas is waiting at the dais to your left, and the first group of decorating contestants is assembled to the right." "Thank you," Adriana whispered back, and then she lifted her head and projected her voice clearly. "Good people of Thornwick, welcome to the Harvest Festival." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Harold felt a surge of pride as Adriana smiled and waved in the general direction of the noise. They made their way to the dais, where chairs had been set up for them to observe the festivities and judge the competitions. The decorating competition went smoothly, with Thomas providing detailed descriptions that allowed Adriana to make informed judgments. She asked thoughtful questions about the materials used, the themes chosen, and the overall creativity of each entry. When she announced the winner, a young couple who had created an elaborate harvest scene using dyed grains and dried flowers, her explanation of why she chose them showed such understanding and appreciation that no one could doubt the legitimacy of her decision. The various contests followed: archery, wrestling, races for children and adults. Adriana announced each winner with appropriate ceremony, her voice strong and clear, her manner regal and composed. Harold watched the crowd's reaction, seeing skepticism gradually transform into respect and even admiration. When the time came for the dancing, Harold led Adriana to the center of the courtyard. The musicians struck up a traditional harvest waltz, and Harold held his wife carefully, guiding her through the steps they had practiced together in private. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured as they turned. "Everyone is watching, and they're amazed." "I'm terrified," Adriana admitted, but she was smiling, but also exhilarated. "Is this what it always feels like to be on display?" "Usually it's more boring," Harold replied, making her laugh. As the dance ended, the crowd applauded enthusiastically. Other couples joined them for the group dances that followed, and Harold watched with pride as Adriana moved through the patterns with increasing confidence, her face glowing with pleasure and triumph. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the festival grounds, Harold and Adriana retired to the dais for the final ceremony of the day, the lighting of the harvest bonfire. This was one of the oldest traditions, symbolizing gratitude for the year's bounty and hope for the seasons to come. Harold guided Adriana to stand before the massive pile of wood that had been constructed in the center of the main courtyard. The crowd gathered around in a great circle, their faces expectant in the fading light. A lit torch was placed carefully in Adriana's hand, and Harold positioned himself close behind her, ready to assist if needed. "The bonfire is directly in front of you, about 5 paces forward," he whispered. "I'll guide you." But Adriana shook her head slightly. "Let me try on my own," she murmured back. "Please." Harold's heart clenched with worry, but he stepped back, allowing her the space she requested. The crowd fell silent, watching as their blind queen stood alone with the torch, facing the unlit bonfire. Adriana took a careful step forward, then another, using the heat of the torch to gauge her distance from the wood. Harold held his breath, resisting the urge to reach out and guide her. On her fourth step, her foot caught on an uneven stone, and she stumbled slightly. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, but Adriana caught herself, steadied, and continued forward. When she reached the bonfire, she extended the torch carefully until she felt it connect with the kindling at the base. The dry wood caught immediately, flames licking upward and spreading quickly through the structure. The crowd erupted in cheers as the fire blazed to life, illuminating the courtyard with warm, dancing light. Adriana turned back toward where Harold stood, her face radiant with accomplishment. He moved to her side immediately, taking her free hand and squeezing it proudly. "You were magnificent," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Your queen has lit the harvest fire. Let the celebration continue." The festivities went on late into the night, with music and dancing and feasting. Harold and Adriana remained for several hours, accepting congratulations from nobles and common folk alike. Even Lady Catherine approached, her expression grudging but her words courteous as she acknowledged that the festival had been a success. It was nearly midnight when they finally retired to their chambers, both exhausted but exhilarated. Meredith helped Adriana out of her elaborate gown and into a comfortable dressing robe, then discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in the sitting room. "Today was perfect," Adriana said, settling into her favorite chair by the fire. "I was so afraid I would fail, that I would prove all the doubters right. But we did it, Harold. We actually did it." "You did it," Harold corrected, taking the chair beside hers. "Yes, you had help and support. But the success was yours, Adriana. The grace, the poise, the intelligence you displayed today, that was all you." Adriana's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my anchor these past weeks, my strength when I doubted myself. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me," Harold said quietly. "Being with you, supporting you, watching you succeed, that's been its own reward." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Harold found himself studying Adriana's face in the firelight, the delicate curve of her cheek, the soft fullness of her lips, the way the flames cast dancing shadows across her features. "Adriana," he began, then hesitated, Marcus's words echoing in his mind. Perhaps it was time to be honest about his feelings, to risk vulnerability for the chance at something real. "Yes?" she prompted, turning toward him with a questioning expression. "These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, I've realized something important." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "You've become more to me than just a wife in name, more than a political arrangement or a consequence of a foolish wager. I find myself thinking about you constantly, looking forward to our time together, missing you when we're apart. I believe I'm falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that." Adriana's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth. "Harold, you don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I know this marriage wasn't your choice, not really. You agreed to it to avoid shame and hardship, and I have no right to expect your feelings to match mine. But I wanted to be honest with you, to let you know that what I feel is real and growing stronger every day." Adriana was quiet for a long moment, and Harold felt his heart hammering in his chest as he waited for her response. Had he made a terrible mistake? Had he burdened her with unwanted emotions? Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think this marriage wasn't my choice? You think I agreed to it only to avoid shame, didn't you?" Harold asked, confused by her tone. Adriana shook her head slowly. "Harold, do you remember what I said in the chapel when you offered to let me leave? I said I would stay not because I was brought here as part of a wager, but because you had shown me more kindness and respect in those few minutes than I had received from most people in my entire life." "I remember," Harold said. "What I didn't say, what I was afraid to admit even to myself, was that in those moments, standing there with you, feeling your strength and gentleness, hearing the sincerity in your voice, something inside me recognized something in you, a connection, a possibility, a hope that maybe this impossible situation could become something beautiful." Hope bloomed in Harold's chest. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life," Adriana interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "Not because I'm now a queen, not because I live in a castle and have servants to attend me, but because I'm with you, because every day I discover new reasons to admire you, to respect you, to care for you. You make me laugh, you challenge me to be better, You see me as whole and capable when others see only my blindness. How could I not fall in love with you?" Harold felt as though his heart might burst. He moved from his chair to kneel before hers, taking both her hands in his. "You love me?" Adriana's face was radiant, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you, Harold. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you defended me in the chapel, and I've been falling deeper ever since." Harold raised her hands to his lips, kissing them tenderly. "I don't deserve you," he said hoarsely, "but I swear I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." "You already are," Adriana whispered. She reached out, her hands finding his face, tracing his features in the way she had that first day. "May I kiss you?" "Please," Harold breathed. She leaned forward, and he guided her lips to his, their first real kiss filled with all the emotion and longing that had been building between them for weeks. It was tender and passionate, hesitant and eager all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, their foreheads resting together. "I've wanted to do that for so long," Harold admitted. "Why didn't you?" Adriana asked with a slight laugh. "I was afraid," he confessed. "Afraid of pushing you too fast, of making you uncomfortable, of wanting more than you were willing to give." "I was afraid too," Adriana said. "Afraid that what I was feeling was one-sided, that you were just being kind, fulfilling your duty as my husband." Harold cupped her face gently. "This stopped being about duty weeks ago, my love. This is about wanting to be with you, choosing you, loving you freely." They kissed again, longer this time, years of loneliness and longing melting away in the warmth of their shared affection. When they finally settled back in their chairs, still holding hands, the future seemed suddenly brighter and full of possibility. "What happens now?" Adriana asked softly. "Now we continue building our life together," Harold replied. "We face whatever challenges come our way as partners, as lovers, as husband and wife in every sense. We create the marriage we both want, not the one that was forced upon us." "I like the sound of that," Adriana said, smiling. She stifled a yawn. "Though I confess, I'm absolutely exhausted. Today was wonderful but draining." Harold stood, helping her to her feet. "Then you should rest. We have all the time in the world for everything else." They stood at the threshold between their two chambers, reluctant to separate even for sleep. Finally, Adriana reached up to touch his face one more time. "Good night, my love," she said. "Good night," Harold replied, kissing her forehead tenderly. "Sleep well." He watched as she made her way into her chamber, Meredith appearing to help her prepare for bed. Only when her door had closed did he retreat to his own room, his heart full and his mind racing with the revelation of their mutual love. The next morning, Harold woke to find a note had been slipped under his door. The handwriting was Meredith's, but the message was from Adriana. "Join me for breakfast in the gardens? I want to feel the morning sun and share it with you." Harold dressed quickly and made his way to the castle gardens, where he found Adriana already waiting at a small table that had been set up near the fountain. She wore a simple dress of soft blue, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "Good morning," he said, bending to kiss her cheek. "Good morning," she replied, her face lighting up at his presence. "I hope you don't mind, but I asked the staff to serve us breakfast out here. The weather is so lovely, and I wanted to enjoy it with you." They ate together in the peaceful morning air, talking and laughing like the lovers they now acknowledged themselves to be. Harold described the garden in detail for her, the late blooming flowers, the fallen leaves creating a carpet of gold and red, the birds splashing in the fountain. Their peaceful meal was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus, his expression urgent. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there's news from the northern border. Lord Rothwell's messenger arrived this morning with reports of raiders crossing from Scotland, burning villages and stealing livestock." Harold's expression darkened. "How many villages?" "3 so far, according to the reports. Rothwell is requesting military support to drive them back and secure the border." Harold looked at Adriana, regret already forming in his chest. "I'll need to lead a force north. This is exactly the sort of threat that requires the king's personal attention." Adriana reached across the table, finding his hand. "I understand. You have responsibilities beyond this castle. How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks, perhaps 3 if the situation is worse than reported," Harold estimated. "I'm sorry, my love. After last night, leaving you is the last thing I want to do." "Then come back to me safely," Adriana said firmly. "Deal with the raiders, protect our people, and and return home. I'll be here waiting." Harold raised her hand to his lips. "I will. I promise." The next few hours passed in a flurry of preparation. Harold conferred with his military advisors, selected the men who would accompany him, and made arrangements for the governance of the kingdom in his absence. He appointed Marcus to remain at the castle as Adriana's protector and advisor, trusting his friend completely to keep his wife safe. Before departing, Harold met with Adriana one final time in their private chambers. He held her close, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the scent of her hair, the sound of her breathing. "Be careful," she whispered against his chest. "I've only just found you. I'm not ready to lose you." "You won't lose me," Harold promised. "I'll return to you, Adriana. Nothing will keep me from coming back to the woman I love." They kissed one last time, pouring all their emotion into the embrace. When they finally parted, both had tears in their eyes. Harold rode north with a force of 200 men, his heart heavy at leaving Adriana, but his resolve firm to deal with the threat quickly and return home. The journey to the northern border took 3 days of hard riding, and what he found there was worse than the initial reports had suggested. The raiders were not merely opportunistic bandits, but an organized force, perhaps 50 strong, led by a Scottish lord named MacGregor, who had a long-standing grudge against the English crown. They had burned 5 villages, not 3, and were using the rough terrain of the border country to evade Rothwell's men. Harold spent the next week hunting the raiders, using his knowledge of military tactics and the land to corner them. The final confrontation came in a narrow valley, where Harold's forces managed to surround MacGregor's men. The battle was fierce but relatively brief, Harold's superior numbers and training overwhelming the raiders. MacGregor himself faced Harold in single combat, a tradition among warriors that Harold honored even though it put him at personal risk. The Scottish lord was skilled, but Harold's strength and determination proved superior. When MacGregor finally yielded, Harold accepted his surrender and took him prisoner rather than killing him, showing mercy that surprised many of his men. "Why let him live?" one of his captains asked later as they prepared to return south. "He's caused so much destruction." "Because mercy can be more powerful than vengeance," Harold replied, thinking of Adriana and how her gentleness had changed him. "MacGregor will stand trial and face justice, but I won't add to the cycle of violence if I can help it." The journey home took another 3 days, but Harold pushed the pace, eager to return to Adriana. When Thornwick Castle finally came into view, he felt his heart lift with anticipation. He arrived in the late afternoon, dusty and weary from travel but whole and uninjured. Marcus met him in the courtyard, gripping his arm in greeting. "Welcome home, Your Majesty." "The Queen will be overjoyed to see you." "Where is she?" Harold asked, already looking around. "In the library, I believe. She spent much of your absence there, working with Brother Timothy on her tactile texts." Harold made his way through the castle with quick strides, not even stopping to change out of his travel-stained clothing. He burst into the library to find Adriana exactly where Marcus had said, seated at a table with her fingers moving over a raised letter text. She looked up at the sound of the door, her face transforming from concentration to pure joy. "Harold, is that you?" "It's me," he said, crossing the room in quick strides. "I'm home." Adriana rose and ran toward his voice, and Harold caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet as they embraced. She was laughing and crying at once, her hands frantically touching his face, his shoulders, his arms, as if assuring herself he was truly there and whole. "You're safe," she kept repeating. "Thank God you're safe." "I promised I would come back to you," Harold said, setting her down but not releasing her. "Did you doubt me?" "Every single day," Adriana admitted. "I know you're strong and skilled, but war is unpredictable. I was terrified something would happen to you." Harold kissed her thoroughly, not caring that Brother Timothy was undoubtedly still in the library somewhere, witnessing their reunion. "I'm here, I'm safe, and I never want to leave you again." "Then don't," Adriana said, "or at least take me with you next time. These past 2 weeks without you have been miserable. I don't want to spend our marriage apart." Harold and Adriana spent the evening catching up on everything that had happened during their separation. Harold described the campaign in detail, the strategy he had used to corner the raiders, the final battle, and his decision to spare MacGregor's life. Adriana listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and expressing both relief at his safety and pride in his mercy. In turn, Adriana shared what had transpired at the castle during his absence. She had continued her work with Brother Timothy, who had completed 3 full texts in the raised letter style, giving her access to a collection of poetry, a history of the kingdom, and a book of practical household management. She had also begun holding regular meetings with the castle staff, establishing herself more firmly in her role as queen. Lady Catherine tried to cause trouble again, Adriana admitted as they sat together in their sitting room, Harold's arm around her shoulders. She suggested to several nobles that with you away, perhaps the council should take a more active role in governance, implying that I couldn't be trusted to help maintain order. Harold felt anger flash through him. What did you do? I invited her to a private meeting, Adriana said with a slight smile. And I told her that I understood she had ambitions to marry you herself and that she was angry about losing that opportunity. I said I sympathized with her disappointment, but that undermining me wouldn't change the fact that I was your wife and your queen. Then I offered her a choice. She could accept reality and work with me constructively, or she could continue her campaign of subtle sabotage and find herself excluded from court entirely. Harold laughed, impressed by his wife's direct approach. How did she respond? She was shocked at first. I think she assumed I was too timid to confront her directly. But after some sputtering, she actually apologized. Not warmly, but genuinely enough. She said she would give me a fair chance to prove myself. Adriana paused. I don't think we'll ever be friends, but at least the open hostility seems to have ended. You handled that brilliantly, Harold said, kissing her temple. I'm so proud of you. They fell into a comfortable silence, simply enjoying being together again. Harold reflected on how much had changed in the 2 months since their wedding. What had begun as a reckless wager had transformed into the most meaningful relationship of his life. He had found in Adriana not just a wife, but a true partner, someone who challenged him, supported him, and loved him completely. Harold, Adriana said softly, breaking into his thoughts. There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been waiting to share until you returned. He heard the nervousness in her voice and pulled back slightly to look at her face. What is it? Is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think so. She took a deep breath. I believe I'm with child. Harold's mind went blank for a moment, unable to process what she had just said. Then understanding crashed over him like a wave, bringing with it a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. A child? We're going to have a child. Adriana nodded, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't certain until a few days ago, but the signs are all there. Margaret noticed it first, actually. She said I had the look of a woman in the early stages of pregnancy. I consulted with the castle physician, and he confirmed it. We'll have a baby sometime in the spring. Harold pulled her close, his own eyes wet with tears. Adriana, my love, this is wonderful news. The most wonderful news. Then a thought struck him, and he pulled back, concerned. But are you all right? Is the baby all right? What did the physician say about your condition, your blindness? Does it affect? The physician said everything seems perfectly normal. Adriana assured him, laughing softly at his sudden worry. My blindness has no bearing on my ability to carry and deliver a healthy child. He said I'm strong and healthy, and he expects no complications. Relief flooded through Harold. An heir, he said wonderingly. We're going to have an heir. Or a daughter, Adriana pointed out. It could be a girl. Then she'll be the most loved princess in the kingdom, Harold declared. Boy or girl, this child will be cherished beyond measure. They held each other for a long time, overwhelmed by the joy and weight of the news. Harold thought about Lord Ashworth's cruel prediction that Adriana couldn't provide him with heirs, and he felt a fierce satisfaction in proving the man wrong. But more than that, he felt gratitude and wonder that this woman, this remarkable woman who had come into his life through such strange circumstances, was now carrying his child. The next morning, Harold called the council together to make the announcement. The councilors assembled in the council chamber, a circular room with a large oak table at its center. Maps and documents covered the walls, and a fire burned in the hearth to ward off the autumn chill. Marcus was already present, as were the other key advisors, Lord Edmund Fairmont, the elderly treasurer, Sir Roland Blackstone, the Master of Arms, and Bishop William, the kingdom's highest religious authority. They stood as Harold entered, bowing respectfully. My lords, Harold began, taking his seat at the head of the table. I have important news to share. Queen Adriana is with child. By spring, God willing, the kingdom will have an heir. The reaction was immediate and jubilant. The counselors broke into smiles and congratulations, their genuine pleasure evident. Even Lord Fairmont, usually dour and pessimistic, looked delighted. "This is excellent news, Your Majesty," the treasurer said. "The kingdom has been anxious about the succession. This will bring great reassurance to the nobles and common folk alike. We should plan a celebration," Marcus suggested. "A feast to announce the news publicly and give thanks." "Agreed," Harold said, "but modest in scale. The Queen tires easily these days, and I won't have her overtaxed for the sake of ceremony." Bishop William leaned forward, his aged face thoughtful. "Your Majesty, if I may, there are those who will question whether the child can inherit if the Queen that is, given her condition." Harold's expression hardened. "If you're asking whether my child's right to inherit will be affected by the mother's blindness, the answer is absolutely not. Any person who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally." The bishop raised his hands placatingly. "I meant no offense, Your Majesty. I merely wanted to ensure we were prepared to address such concerns if they arise. You know how court politics can be." "Then we address them firmly and finally," Harold said. "Queen Adriana's blindness in no way diminishes her capacity as queen or as a mother. Our child, regardless of gender, will be the legitimate heir to the throne, and that is the end of the discussion." The counselors nodded their agreement, though Harold could see calculation in some of their eyes. He knew that not everyone would accept his declaration so easily, that there would be whispers and doubts. But he was prepared to face down anyone who challenged his wife or child. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to life at Thornwick Castle. Adriana's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she experienced the usual discomforts, fatigue, and occasional nausea. Harold was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest frequently and not overtax herself. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Adriana protested one afternoon when Harold tried to prevent her from walking to the library on her own. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can manage a walk through the castle." "I know," Harold admitted, "but you're not just any woman. You're my wife, carrying my child, and I can't help but worry." Adriana softened, reaching up to touch his face. "I love that you care so much, but you have to trust that I know my own limits. I'll ask for help when I need it, I promise." Harold learned to step back, to support without smothering, though it wasn't easy. He watched with pride as Adriana continued to fulfill her duties as queen even as her pregnancy advanced. She attended council meetings when her energy permitted, continued her work with the household staff, and even began planning for the baby's arrival, working with the castle's seamstresses to prepare clothing and linens. The public announcement of the pregnancy was met with widespread celebration throughout the kingdom. Nobles sent gifts and congratulations, and the common people held festivals in the towns and villages to mark the joyous news. Harold noticed that the announcement seemed to shift public perception of Adriana significantly. Those who had doubted her suitability as queen now saw her as the mother of the future heir, a role they could understand and value. However, not all responses were positive. About 6 weeks after the announcement, Harold received a visitor he had not expected and did not welcome. Lord Ashworth, the disgraced nobleman, arrived at the castle requesting an audience, and Harold debated refusing him entirely. But curiosity won out, and he agreed to meet Ashworth in his private study, with Marcus present as a witness and precaution. Ashworth looked diminished from the last time Harold had seen him. The transfer of his lands to the crown had clearly taken a toll, and he wore simpler clothing than his previous finery. He bowed deeply as he entered the study, his manner obsequious in a way that immediately put Harold on guard. "Your Majesty, thank you for seeing me," Ashworth began. "I know I have no right to ask for your time after everything that has transpired." "Then why are you here?" Harold asked bluntly, remaining seated behind his desk, while Ashworth stood before him like a supplicant. "I've come to apologize," Ashworth said, "and to offer my congratulations on the upcoming birth of your child." Harold studied the man carefully, looking for signs of deception. "Your apology is noted. Was there anything else?" Ashworth shifted uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, I was wrong about many things. Wrong to manipulate you with that wager, wrong to use Lady Adriana, now Queen Adriana, as a pawn in my schemes, wrong to assume that her blindness made her unsuitable as queen. You were wrong about all of that," Harold agreed coldly. "What's changed? Why this sudden contrition?" "Because I've watched from a distance as your marriage has unfolded," Ashworth replied. "I've heard the reports of how the Queen has won over the castle staff, how she successfully oversaw the harvest festival, how she has managed her duties with grace and intelligence. I've seen how the kingdom has rallied around the news of the pregnancy, and I've realized that my cynical view of the world, my belief that only superficial qualities matter, was fundamentally flawed. Harold wanted to believe the man's words, but years of dealing with court politics had taught him caution. If this is some scheme to regain your lands or your position at court, you're wasting your time. It's not, Ashworth insisted. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for my lands back. I simply wanted to acknowledge that I was wrong and that you were right. You said you valued character over appearance, and you proved it. Queen Adriana is a remarkable woman, and you were wise to see that when others, including myself, could not. Marcus spoke up from his position by the door. Lord Ashworth, your words sound sincere, but forgive us if we're skeptical. You've proven yourself to be a manipulator and a schemer. Why should we believe this conversion is genuine? Ashworth turned to face Marcus. You shouldn't believe it based on my words alone. Watch my actions. I'm leaving court, retiring to a small estate I retained in the West. I won't trouble your majesties again. I simply wanted to offer this apology before I departed, to acknowledge my failures and wrongdoings. Harold stood, moving around the desk to face Ashworth directly. You hurt my wife with your schemes. You treated her as a tool to be used rather than a person to be respected. For that, I find it difficult to offer forgiveness. I understand, Ashworth said quietly. I don't deserve forgiveness, but perhaps in time you might find it in your heart to grant it anyway. Not for my sake, but for your own peace. After Ashworth departed, Harold stood at the window, watching the man ride away from the castle. Marcus joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. What do you think? Marcus asked. Was he sincere? I don't know, Harold admitted. Part of me wants to believe he's genuinely changed, that seeing our happiness and success has made him reconsider his worldview. But another part suspects this is just another manipulation, though I can't see what he would gain from it. Perhaps he gains peace of conscience, Marcus suggested. Or perhaps he truly has learned something from watching your marriage flourish when he predicted it would fail. Harold turned from the window. Either way, he's gone now, and good riddance. I have more important things to focus on than Lord Ashworth's moral awakening or lack thereof. Speaking of which, Marcus said with a grin, I passed the Queen in the corridor earlier, and she was asking after you. Something about wanting your opinion on baby names. Harold's expression softened immediately. Then I shouldn't keep her waiting. He found Adriana in the nursery that was being prepared, a sunny room adjacent to their chambers that had once been a storage area. Workers had transformed it completely, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and installing new windows to let in more light. Adriana stood in the center of the room, her hands resting on her growing belly, her face peaceful. There you are, she said as Harold entered. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. Never, Harold said, crossing to embrace her from behind, his hands covering hers on her belly. How are you feeling? Heavy, Adriana said with a laugh. This child of ours seems to be growing rapidly. The physician says everything is progressing normally, but I feel enormous. You're beautiful, Harold murmured, kissing her neck. Absolutely radiant. They stood together in the peaceful room, imagining the child who would soon fill it with noise and life. Harold thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that reckless wager in the great hall to this moment of quiet domesticity and deep love. I've been thinking about names, Adriana said. If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Edward, after your grandfather. You've spoken so fondly of him. Edward is perfect, Harold agreed. And if it's a girl, Eleanor perhaps? After Lady Eleanor, who has been so kind to me, though I'm open to other suggestions. They discussed names and plans for the nursery, their voices soft in the fading afternoon light. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, coating the castle grounds in white. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Harold and Adriana felt nothing but warmth and anticipation for the future they were building together. Winter settled over Thornwick Castle with a blanket of snow and ice that transformed the landscape into a gleaming wonderland. Adriana's pregnancy continued to progress, and as the months passed, her belly grew round and full. The castle buzzed with anticipation, servants preparing for the arrival of the heir, nobles sending gifts from across the kingdom, and Harold becoming increasingly protective as Adriana's due date approached. It was early March when the pains began. Adriana woke in the middle of the night, gripping Harold's arm as a contraction seized her. He bolted upright immediately, his heart racing. "Is it time?" he asked, already moving to light candles. "I think so," Adriana said, breathing through the pain. "The contractions started about an hour ago. They're getting closer together." Harold moved with swift efficiency, rousing Meredith and sending for the physician and midwife. Within minutes, their chambers were filled with activity. The midwife, a capable woman named Goodwife Martha, who had delivered half the babies in the region, took charge immediately, examining Adriana and declaring that the birth was indeed imminent. "First babies can take time, Your Majesty," Martha said to Harold, who was hovering anxiously. "You might want to wait elsewhere. This could be many hours yet." "I'm not leaving," Harold said firmly, taking Adriana's hand. "I'll stay with my wife." Martha looked skeptical. It was unusual for husbands to remain during childbirth, but Adriana squeezed Harold's hand gratefully. "Please let him stay," she said. "I need him here." The midwife relented, and Harold remained at Adriana's side as the labor progressed. He had faced battles and dangers of all kinds, but nothing had prepared him for the helplessness of watching the woman he loved in pain. He held her hand, wiped her brow, whispered encouragements, and felt his heart break with every contraction that racked her body. "I can't do this," Adriana gasped during a particularly intense contraction. "It's too much, Harold. I can't." "Yes, you can," Harold insisted, his voice firm despite his own fear. "You're the strongest person I know, Adriana. You've overcome every challenge life has thrown at you. You can do this too." "Tell me about the garden," Adriana pleaded between contractions. "Describe it to me. The spring flowers? What's blooming now?" Harold understood she needed distraction, something to focus on beyond the pain. He began to describe the castle gardens as they would look in spring, painting pictures with his words of tulips and daffodils, of cherry blossoms and budding roses. He described colors and shapes, the way the morning sun would catch the dew on flower petals, the sound of birds returning from their winter migrations. Adriana clung to his voice, letting his words carry her through the waves of pain. Hours passed, the contractions growing stronger and closer together. The midwife checked her progress regularly, offering encouragements and instructions. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Martha announced that it was time to push. Harold supported Adriana, holding her against his chest as she bore down with all her strength. He had never felt more useless or more necessary, unable to take away her pain, but able to be there, to support her, to love her through every moment. "I can see the head," Martha exclaimed. "One more push, Your Grace. Give me one more good push." Adriana gathered her remaining strength and pushed with everything she had. Harold felt her body tense against his, heard her cry of effort and pain, and then, suddenly, miraculously, a new sound filled the room, the sharp, indignant wail of a newborn baby. "It's a boy," Martha announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Harold felt tears streaming down his face as he watched the midwife clean and wrap their son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a face red with outrage at being thrust into the cold world. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. Martha placed the baby in Adriana's arms, and Harold watched as his wife's hands explored their son's tiny features with the same gentle curiosity she had once used to learn his own face. Tears streamed down Adriana's cheeks as she traced the baby's nose, his ears, his impossibly small fingers. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" she asked Harold, her voice thick with emotion. "He is," Harold confirmed, his arm around both his wife and son. "He's absolutely beautiful. You were magnificent, my love. I'm so proud of you." The baby quieted as Adriana held him, seeming to recognize his mother's voice and touch. Harold marveled at how something so small could be so perfect, how this tiny person represented everything he and Adriana had built together. "Prince Edward," Adriana murmured, testing the name they had chosen. "Welcome to the world, little one." The castle erupted in celebration when the news spread. Church bells rang throughout the kingdom, announcing the birth of the heir. Nobles and common folk alike rejoiced, and gifts began pouring in from every corner of the realm. Harold sent word to the council and made the formal announcement himself in the great hall later that day, his face beaming with pride and joy. "The kingdom has an heir," he declared. "Prince Edward Harold Thornwood, born this morning to Queen Adriana and myself. Mother and child are both healthy and well." The assembled nobles cheered and applauded, genuine happiness evident on most faces. Marcus clapped Harold on the shoulder, grinning broadly. "Congratulations, my friend. You're a father." "I can barely believe it," Harold admitted. "This morning I was terrified I would lose them both, and now I have a son. A healthy, perfect son." Over the following weeks, Harold and Adriana settled into their new roles as parents. Edward proved to be a demanding but healthy baby, crying lustily when hungry or uncomfortable, but sleeping peacefully when content. Adriana took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning to care for Edward through touch and sound. Harold watched in amazement as his wife nursed their son, changed his swaddling, soothed his cries, all without the benefit of sight. She developed techniques and systems, using texture and scent to identify different items, listening to the baby's breathing to know when he was sleeping deeply or about to wake. "You're a natural mother," Harold observed one evening as they sat together in the nursery, watching Edward sleep in his cradle. "I'm terrified most of the time," Adriana admitted. "What if I miss something important? What if I don't notice when he's ill or in distress?" "Then we'll notice together," Harold said. "You're not doing this alone, Adriana. We're partners in this, just as we are in everything else." True to his word, Harold was an active and involved father. He took turns walking with Edward when the baby was fussy at night, changed swaddling without complaint, and spent hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle of his existence. As spring progressed into early summer, the castle settled into a peaceful routine. Harold managed the kingdom's affairs with his usual competence, but he made sure to prioritize time with his family. Adriana continued her duties as queen while caring for Edward, proving once again that her blindness was no barrier to capability. One warm afternoon in May, Harold found Adriana in the gardens with Edward. She sat on a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, the baby cradled in her arms. Harold paused to watch them, his heart swelling with love for his family. "I know you're there," Adriana said with a smile, not turning toward him. "You have a very distinctive walk." Harold laughed and joined them on the bench. "How did I get so lucky?" he mused. "A beautiful, brilliant wife and a healthy son. Sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming." "If you are, then we're sharing the same dream," Adriana replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you remember that first day in the chapel, when you saw me and realized I was blind? I remember thinking Lord Ashworth had set a clever trap," Harold said. "That he'd chosen you specifically to make me reject the marriage and prove his point about the importance of appearance. He did choose me for that reason," Adriana confirmed. "He told my father that he needed a noble woman with an obvious flaw, someone the king would find unsuitable. My blindness made me perfect for his purposes." Harold's arm tightened around her. "He was wrong, though. Your blindness doesn't make you unsuitable. It makes you uniquely you, and I wouldn't change a single thing about you." Adriana smiled, her free hand finding his. "I used to curse my blindness, you know. After I lost my sight, I spent years being angry and bitter, feeling like God had punished me for some unknown sin. But now, looking back, I wonder if losing my sight was what prepared me to see what really matters." "What do you mean?" Harold asked. "I mean that, because I can't judge people by their appearance, I learned to judge them by their actions and their character," Adriana explained. "When you spoke to me in the chapel, when you offered me the choice to leave, I couldn't see your face or your crown or any of the trappings of royalty. All I could hear was your voice, sincere and kind, offering me dignity when others had tried to take it away. That's when I knew you were worth taking a chance on." Harold kissed her temple softly. "I'm glad you did. Take that chance, I mean. My life began the day you agreed to marry me, Adriana. Everything before that was just preparation." They sat together in peaceful silence, Edward sleeping contentedly between them. The gardens were alive with the sounds of summer, birds singing, bees humming among the flowers, the distant laughter of servants going about their work. The sun was warm on their faces, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of roses and honeysuckle. "Your Majesties." They turned toward the voice to see Marcus approaching, a broad smile on his face. He bowed as he reached them. "Forgive the interruption, but I bring news. Lord Ashworth's former steward has just arrived with the final documents transferring the last of the Ashworth lands to the crown. The process is complete." Harold nodded with satisfaction. "Good. See that the steward is compensated for his service and ensure the lands are being properly managed." "Already done, Your Majesty," Marcus reported. Then his expression grew more serious. "There's something else." The steward brought a letter. It's from Lord Ashworth himself, addressed to both of you." Harold and Adriana exchanged glances. "Read it," Harold said. Marcus unfolded the parchment and began to read. "Your Majesties, by the time you receive this letter, I will have departed England for the continent, where I intend to spend my remaining days in quiet reflection. I wanted to write one final time to express my genuine remorse for the pain I caused you both. In my arrogance and cynicism, I believed I understood the world and how it worked. I thought physical perfection was paramount, that love was a fantasy, and that people were merely tools to be used in pursuit of power and status. Watching your marriage from afar has shown me how profoundly wrong I was. Queen Adriana, you have proven yourself to be a capable and beloved queen, your blindness no barrier to your success. King Harold, you have shown that a man can value character and substance over superficial qualities and be stronger for it. Together, you have built something beautiful and real, and in doing so, you have taught this old fool that perhaps redemption is possible even for the most cynical of hearts. I do not ask for forgiveness. I have not earned it. But I wanted you to know that the child you have welcomed into the world is blessed beyond measure to have parents who truly love each other and who will teach them that worth comes from within, not from appearances or circumstances. May your family know nothing but joy and prosperity. With sincere respect and deep regret for my past actions, Lord Victor Ashworth." Marcus finished reading and looked up. "What do you think? Is it genuine?" Harold considered for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that people can change when confronted with evidence that their worldview is flawed. Whether Ashworth has truly changed or whether this is merely another manipulation, I suppose we'll never know. But I choose to believe in the possibility of redemption, even for him." Adriana nodded in agreement. "Besides, it doesn't really matter what his motivations are. He's gone, his schemes are ended, and we have our life together. That's what's important." "Well said, Your Grace," Marcus agreed. He bowed again and departed, leaving the small family alone once more. As the afternoon wore on, Edward woke and began to fuss. Harold took him from Adriana's arms, walking with his son through the gardens and describing everything they saw. He pointed out the different flowers, the butterflies dancing among the blooms, the clouds drifting across the sky. Edward couldn't understand the words yet, but he seemed to enjoy the sound of his father's voice, his tiny eyes trying to focus on Harold's face. "Your mother and I have quite a story, little one," Harold murmured to his son. "We came together through trickery and manipulation, through a reckless wager and stubborn pride. But from that unlikely beginning, we found something real and true. We found love." He looked back to where Adriana sat on the bench, her face turned toward the sun, a peaceful smile on her lips. She was, he thought, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, not because of her physical appearance, though she was indeed lovely, but because of who she was. Brave, intelligent, kind, and strong. "That's your mother," Harold told Edward. "The queen who couldn't see but who saw more clearly than anyone else. The woman who taught me what really matters in life. The love of my life." As if sensing she was being discussed, Adriana turned toward them. "What are you telling our son about me?" she called out, laughter in her voice. "Only the truth," Harold replied, returning to her side. "That he has the most remarkable mother in the world." They walked back to the castle together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Harold described the sunset to Adriana in detail, the way the colors seemed to set the clouds on fire, the long shadows stretching across the grounds, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. That night, after Edward had been fed and put to bed, Harold and Adriana retired to their own chambers. They stood together at the window of their sitting room, Harold's arms wrapped around Adriana from behind, both of them content and at peace. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't accepted Ashworth's wager?" Adriana asked quietly. "If you had refused, or if you had backed out when you saw I was blind?" "Sometimes," Harold admitted, "but I can't imagine my life without you now. Whatever led us to each other, I'm grateful for it." "Even the reckless parts?" Adriana teased. "Especially the reckless parts," Harold confirmed. "Sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances, from leaping without looking, from being foolish enough to believe in the impossible." Adriana turned in his arms to face him, her hands finding his face in the familiar gesture he had come to treasure. "I love you, Harold. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. And I love you, Harold replied, leaning down to kiss her softly. My queen, my wife, my partner in all things. I am yours, now and always. They held each other as night fell completely over Thornwick Castle, the stars emerging one by one in the vast sky above. In the nursery next door, their son slept peacefully, unaware of the extraordinary love that surrounded him, the product of a reckless wager that had transformed into the truest romance either of his parents had ever known. The kingdom was at peace, the succession was secure, and two people who had been brought together by manipulation and pride had found genuine happiness and love. What had begun as a bet designed to prove cynical points about human nature had instead proven the opposite. That love could flourish in the most unlikely circumstances, that character truly mattered more than appearance, and that sometimes the greatest blessings came disguised as challenges. As Harold and Adriana prepared for bed, they talked quietly about their plans for the future. They would raise Edward to value people for their character rather than their circumstances. They would teach him that true strength came from kindness, that wisdom came from listening, and that the best leaders were those who served their people with humility and grace. He'll be a good king one day, Adriana said as they settled into bed. With you as his father and example, how could he be anything else? And with you as his mother, teaching him empathy and resilience, Harold added, he'll be better than both of us. They fell asleep in each other's arms, their hearts full and their future bright. The reckless bet that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by a love that had been tested and proven true. They had overcome doubt, defied expectations, and built a life together that neither had imagined possible. In the Great Hall, the portrait artists had recently completed a new painting to commemorate the birth of Prince Edward. It showed Harold and Adriana seated together, the baby in Adriana's arms. The artist had captured not just their physical features but something deeper, the connection between them, the love evident in every brushstroke, the way Harold's hand rested protectively on Adriana's shoulder while she cradled their son. Future generations would look at that portrait and see a king and queen who had defied convention, who had proven that true partnership transcended physical limitations, and who had built a legacy of love that would endure for centuries to come. They would tell the story of the reckless wager and the blind queen, of the king who couldn't stop looking at her not because of her appearance, but because of who she was. And in the quiet of their chambers, as dawn began to break over the kingdom, Harold and Adriana slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, a love that saw beyond the surface, a partnership built on respect and trust, and a family bound together by genuine affection and devotion. The reckless bet had been won, not by Lord Ashworth's cynicism, but by the power of love to transform even the most unlikely circumstances into something beautiful and true.